Chapter 619. The new year had just passed, and a few major events that were very important to the people of Lan City happened before and after the Lantern Festival. First, there were hundreds of 6-meter-tall elephants that headed north from Tianjing Basin and arrived at the south gate of Lan City. After confiscating the 6 doors' secret manuals, Shiwanya used a few months to finally subdue this batch of elephant soldiers. Hundreds of behemoths that were 6 meters tall, 11 meters long, and weighed 12 to 13 tons walked on the road. They were like small moving buildings, giving people the feeling that they had returned to the ancient times, when countless wild beasts ran amok. The aboriginals that they encountered along the way had no choice but to avoid the elephant soldiers. No matter what stood in their way, it would eventually be flattened and trampled into mud. As they moved forward, even the ground was shaking. The tremors could be felt from dozens of kilometers away. Many people even thought that an earth dragon had turned over, but later discovered that it was actually a group of behemoths. Many people in Lan City tried to find out what was going on. Finally, news came from the city gate, and many people immediately ran out of the city to watch. After receiving the news, the Empress brought the court officials out of the city to watch. In fact, she had received the news the night before, and there was even a conversation at that time. "Your Majesty, those elephant soldiers will arrive in Lan City tomorrow." After receiving the news, Renbaqian returned to the palace in high spirits and reported to the Empress. "Oh," the Empress responded and understood. "Those are hundreds of elephant soldiers, which are like tanks on the battlefield. Protector General, she spent a lot of effort to subdue them, and they will be very useful in the war with the Yun nation. Your Majesty, can you at least give us a reaction?" Renbaqian was speechless when he saw the Empress's reaction. "Oh," the Empress responded. After a while she looked up and said, "Those things. What else do you want me to do?" Her eyes were full of doubt. It was as if they weren't elephant soldiers but a group of pigs. "They are just a group of pigs. What else do you want me to do?" At that time, Renbaqian only had this thought in his mind. "Your Majesty, although in your eyes, these elephant soldiers aren't very strong and your Majesty alone can clean them up in a short period of time. Even the winged cavalry can kill them all in a short period of time. However, on the battlefield of the Yun nation, these elephant soldiers could be used to charge and break through enemy lines or to attack cities and plunder land. These giant elephants had extremely tough skin, huge bodies and strength. They were extremely lethal to ordinary soldiers and were a great deterrent. It was very difficult for ordinary people to remain indifferent to such behemoths. As such, this was an opportunity to show the people of Lan City how powerful our army was. It was also to let them have a strong confidence in the war ahead, and that they would definitely win. Just like on Earth, many countries would expose some of their weapons to the people every once in a while to increase the confidence and pride of the people in the country, and to deter the enemy. We don't need deterrence right now. We just need to raise the citizens' confidence, like, wow, we actually have such a powerful weapon. Therefore, Your Majesty has to show your face and let the people feel that this is something that Your Majesty values," Renbaqian said to the Empress. The last few sentences were said in an extremely exaggerated tone. "Have you found anyone who has doubts about the outcome of the war?" the Empress asked. "No," Renbaqian answered truthfully. It had been less than a year since the war started. Although the lives of the people had already been affected, no one had any doubts about the outcome of the war. In fact, no one even had any doubts about this war. Therefore, it's fine as long as I'm here. As long as I'm in this position and the people see me, they won't have any worries. I just need to let them know that I'm here, and that's enough." The Empress's voice wasn't loud, but her words were filled with strong confidence and dominance. Renbaqian couldn't help but praise her in his heart. Sure enough, the Empress should be like this. This was why he said that this was how an Empress should be. "Well, Your Majesty, you are right. However, I still hope that Your Majesty will show your face and bring everyone to see these rare giant elephants. At least, most people haven't seen them before, right? Even if it's just a rare sight, it's still a chance for the people of Lan City to cheer." Renbaqian still hoped that the Empress would show her face outside the city tomorrow. It wasn't a petty thought, but he always felt that if the Empress didn't show her face, It would seem as if those giant elephants weren't important. How could he endure this? One had to know that he had always been very concerned about these giant elephants. The Empress finally nodded her head. As a result, the scene of the Empress leading the court officials out of the city to see the giant elephants took place. When everyone left the city, there were people cheering on both sides of the road and in the shops. This was the influence of the Empress in Dayo. Was it because the Empress was the fourth or fifth most powerful person in the world? It made no difference to everyone. Everyone knew that the Empress was the most powerful person in Dayo. When they arrived at the city gate, they saw a group of huge creatures standing in the distance. Their bodies were covered with rattan armor that was soaked in a special plant juice, and they revealed tusks that were 2 to 3 meters long. Even though they were far away, they could still feel their enormous size and the intimidating aura of the herd of over 100 giant elephants. So it's a giant elephant. It's rare to see such a large herd. In the past, I only saw a herd of a dozen or so in the south. Although their individual strength isn't considered strong, they can't be underestimated when they charge. Shirqing said as he recalled what he had seen and heard when he saw the elephant soldiers behind the Empress. This is called a giant elephant? I have never seen it before. Tang Zhinya said. He would only address himself as I in front of Shirqing and the Empress instead of I. The Empress always kicked him around like a ball. He treated Shirqing this way because of the respect he had for elders and wise men. After so many years, he had already gotten used to it. Everyone stopped outside the gate. Renbaqian held the walkie-talkie and ordered, "Advance!" Following which, the herd of elephants in the distance let out a series of deep and resounding moos. Subsequently, over 100 giant elephants began to advance, and the ground began to shake. Under the command of the soldiers behind the elephants, the speed of the elephants began to increase, and the ground rumbled incessantly. One by one, the elephants raised their trunks and let out a roar. The herd of elephants charged wildly toward the city gate with the posture of crushing everything in their way. That kind of attitude, that kind of stance, made many people feel a bit surprised. When these huge monsters charged, it was really amazing. Many ordinary Aboriginal commoners near the city gate felt a trace of fear in their hearts when faced with such a landslide and tsunami-like scene. This made them very dissatisfied. Many of them clenched their fists, straightened their necks, and gritted their teeth as they stared at the charging herd of elephants. They didn't let out a cry of alarm, or take half a step back. All of them thought to themselves that if they took half a step back today, cried out in alarm, or revealed even the slightest bit of timidity, they would lose face. Damn it, do I still want to be shameless? And in front of Her Majesty. Moreover, the Aboriginals have been hunting for a living since ancient times. We can't be afraid of seeing a few of these fellows in our generation. Otherwise, we won't have the face to return to the 60,000 mountains. Such barbaric beasts aroused the blood and fighting spirit in their blood. It was as if they had returned to the era when their ancestors fought with the various beasts in the 60,000 mountains. For a moment, except for the sound of the elephants running and mooing, all the pointing and gossiping at the city gate had disappeared. Instead, it was somewhat quiet. Renbaqian looked back in surprise and saw the commoners clenching their fists with blue veins popping out on their necks and staring ahead with red eyes. He was surprised at first, then relieved, and finally felt a little happy. After all, he was satisfied that the huge weapon that he valued could intimidate these commoners. However, wasn't the reaction of these commoners a little too extreme? Why did they look like they were going to eat someone up? Why did they look so fierce? Haha, this thing isn't bad. It can be used in war. If there's nothing to eat at the front line, we can still eat meat. With such a big body, it should be able to feed a lot of people. Qin Chuan suddenly burst into laughter. Following Qin Chuan's laughter, the people from the Ministry of War laughed as well. Tang Zhinya, Shirqing, and Tuan laughed as well. Following which, the fierce expressions of the commoners also relaxed, and they all laughed out loud. Do you understand? The Empress tilted her head and looked at Renbaqian. I don't understand, Renbaqian answered truthfully. He was a little confused and didn't know what was going on. This is blood, qi, and courage. To you, these elephants are weapons of war, but to others, they're just food. It's not because of who is a cardinal heaven expert, but because this has been the case since ancient times. As the Empress spoke, she was in high spirits and looked heroic. She was obviously very satisfied with the performance of the people behind her and the commoners. Runbaqian looked at the Empress and then at the people behind him before chuckling. Chapter 620. After persuading the Empress to go out of the city to view a batch of elephant soldiers, Runbaqian was taught a lesson. This made him realize that the people of this world were different from those on Earth, and that they reacted differently when encountering things. Subsequently, these elephant soldiers were sent to the Yun nation to test how much power they could exert on the battlefield. After the elephant soldiers left, it was time for the lantern-grabbing contest. Previously, Runbaqian was coerced by the Empress into participating in the contest. Then he shook his head and won a bunch of shoes. This time he accompanied the Empress and watched from the sidelines. The two of them were whispering to each other throughout the contest, and it was quite a public display of affection. 2 days after the lantern-grabbing contest, there was another very important matter. The troops that were transporting the spoils of war and captives from the Yun nation finally arrived. There were close to 100,000 captives, 300 carriages filled with gold, silver, jade and gemstones, and nearly 1,000 ox carts filled with salt. Originally, there were slightly more than 100,000 captives, but thousands of them died during the month-long journey because they wanted to escape, were beheaded in public, or were injured and died due to other reasons. In the end, only 96,400 captives arrived. The number reported was a round number of 96,400. In reality, it could be a little more than that. As they couldn't place too much hope on the statistical ability of the Aboriginal militia, who were originally made up of ordinary people, the militia who were transporting the goods had easily omitted the numbers after the 1,000 digits. As for the missing dozens of captives, at this level, they didn't have much of a concept in their minds. This procession, which was made up of the militia, spoils of war, and captives, stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The ox carts that were transporting the spoils of war arrived outside Lon City at noon, and the end of the procession would only arrive at noon on the third day. Naturally, it was impossible to send all 100,000 captives into Lon City for the Empress, the officials, and the commoners to view. Logically speaking, a group of captives with the highest status should be selected and paraded through the streets of the city. This was the so-called prisoner offering. For example, the warlords of the dozens of cities that had been breached and the military generals that had been captured. Unfortunately, Zidonglai did not have such a thought in his mind. He had a great time killing. Almost all the castellans and officials in dozens of cities were killed by him. The squires who wanted to resist were also killed. The obedient squires and some low-level officials were left in the original city to maintain order. In the end, after picking and choosing from this batch of captives, the ones with the highest status were actually only a few lieutenants of the city lord's army, and a sect leader of a small sect. There were also a few wealthy merchants who were sent into the city as captives, and they really couldn't be considered anything special. When the burly and energetic militia escorted hundreds of carriages filled with spoils of war into the city, the entire Lon City was in an uproar. Both sides of Jingyang Street were filled with people who had heard the news. Even the shops on both sides of the street, and the open windows on the second floor were filled with people. When they saw the queue, they immediately cheered. The militiamen looked at the crowds on both sides and heard the cheers from both sides, and they all looked excited. Seeing this scene, they felt that it was all worth it. Furthermore, they also understood that they were receiving cheers that should have belonged to the soldiers of the Protectorate of the Northeast. The ox cart at the front was pulling stacked boxes. The heavy ox cart squeaked as it moved along the stone road. Even if the boxes weren't opened, the onlookers could imagine what was in the boxes. Images of the boxes filled with gold, silver, and other valuables popped up in their minds. The reality was just as they thought. More than 100 carriages at the front were filled with gold and silver. Excluding the boxes, each carriage carried 600 kilograms of gold and silver. The 100 carriages contained 60,000 kilograms of gold and silver. Most of it was silver, and a small amount of it was gold. The total value was equivalent to millions of taels of silver. However, There were also some jewels and ornaments that were worth more than twice as much. Behind these 100 carriages were 200 carriages filled with gold and silver utensils, calligraphy, paintings, and other valuable-looking objects. When the cloth covering the carriages was removed, the dazzling gold underneath was revealed. Many items were piled up in a messy manner, giving off a feeling that they were of great value. It took 2 hours for the 200 carriages to pass through the crowd. During this time, the cheers were even louder than before. After passing through the crowd, there were more than 10 haggard-looking captives with their hands tied up and their clothes in rags. All of them lowered their heads and dragged their weak bodies as they staggered forward. Compared to the tall, strong, and fierce-looking aboriginal commoners that crowded both sides of the road, they were like shivering quails. Who are they? At this moment, the commoners stopped cheering. All of them stared at this group of captives and asked around. They seem to be captives. Beat them to death. Someone immediately shouted. Beat them to death, my ass. They are to be presented to Her Majesty. Are you going to present them to Her Majesty after they are beaten to death? Someone at the side scolded angrily. Oh, that's fine too. That person immediately replied excitedly. It was worth it to be able to take this opportunity to see Her Majesty. It's impossible to present them to Her Majesty. Not in this lifetime. Instead, they will be brought back and given 30 lashes. Don't worry, we will be very gentle. The public order officer, who was standing at the side, immediately said sinisterly. At the thought of the public order officer's barbed whips, everyone immediately shriveled up. The aboriginals were valiant, and there weren't many commoners in Lawn City who hadn't been whipped before. Many of them had been sent to the palace twice, thrice, or even more. 3 lashes from that kind of whip would cause one to be bedridden for several days. After 30 lashes, one would lose his life. At this moment, Runbachian was wearing an official's robe and standing above the imperial city gate with the Empress and the others. The square in front of the palace below was filled with carriages arriving one after another. Greetings, Your Majesty. Your Majesty is mighty. The militia below immediately cheered when they saw the Empress appear at the top of the city wall. These people couldn't think of anything like, Your Majesty is skilled in both literature and martial arts, and will benefit the common people for thousands of years. You will rule the world for thousands of years. In the end, they could only shout, Your Majesty is mighty. However, the atmosphere was extremely enthusiastic. These militias came from other cities, and 99% of them had never seen the Empress before. At this moment, they were all excited to see her. This trip was really worth it. Well done, the Empress said faintly from the top of the city wall. Her voice was flat, but her voice spread throughout the city. Thank you, Your Majesty. These plain words made these people feel as if they had received the greatest reward. Present. Following a shout, everyone opened the boxes on the carriages, and the carriages immediately reflected the dazzling gold and silver light. Tuwan and the other people from the Ministry of Revenue were elated. 300 carriages of gold and silver were worth at least a few million taels of silver. This batch of gold and silver would be replenished to the national treasury, and the financial situation would finally be a little better. Tong Jingye, Qin Chuan, and the others also looked happy as they touched the slips of paper in their arms. The slips of paper were filled with the areas that their departments needed to spend money on. Chapter 621. After looking at the spoils of war, the Empress ordered them to be sent to the Ministry of Revenue for inventory. She then ordered the dozen captive representatives to be brought to the palace hall. A moment later, more than a dozen shabbily dressed captives were brought into the palace hall, while trembling under the gaze of a group of Cardinal Heaven experts. They weren't asked to kneel as Dayo didn't have this habit. They just stood there and let everyone watch them. However, this kind of watching was close to torture for them. Thinking about a dozen rabbits being watched by dozens of lions with sesame, cumin salt, pots, bowls, ladles, and barbecue grills, this was probably how they felt at that time. The Empress sat on the throne and tapped her chin with one hand, feeling bored. She wasn't interested in such captives. What do you do in the Yun nation? The Empress asked after a while. Then there was silence. Are all of you mute? How dare you not answer Her Majesty's question? You must be tired of living. Liang widened his eyes and emitted a bone-chilling murderous aura. Spare us! Spare us, Your Majesty! The dozen captives immediately became paralyzed. They had suffered a lot along the way, and were already exhausted. They were even more terrified when they were brought to the center of the palace hall. Now that they were frightened by Liang, they immediately became paralyzed. Some of them immediately wet their pants, causing everyone to frown. Forget it. Take them away. The Empress waved her hands in boredom and ordered people to take them away. This was considered a formality for the captives to be sacrificed. These habits of Great Xia are really boring, the Empress said after the captives were taken away. This practice of sacrificing captives was naturally learned from Great Xia. This was the Empress's first time experiencing it, and she was very disappointed to see a few shabbily dressed ants trembling in front of her. It was very boring and uninteresting. Your Majesty, these captives are indeed of no value. If we capture the Emperor and Prime Minister of the Yun nation next time, we can bring them here so that you can ask them what they think, Renbaqian said after a few people were taken away. Oh, that makes sense. The Empress nodded. If the high-ranking officials of the Yun nation were to be sacrificed, she could meet them. That's right. There's really no need for these people to be sacrificed. I don't know which bastard arranged for these people to be shameful to Your Majesty. I'm afraid he's not very smart, Tong Zhinya said disdainfully. Qin Chuan glared at him furiously. The others were all looking forward to watching a good show. In any case, the two of them had been fighting for so many years that everyone was already used to it. That's all for now. All of you may leave, the Empress said faintly. Your Majesty, I have one more thing to say. Seeing that the Empress had spoken, Tong Zhinya hurriedly stepped forward and said, Your Majesty, currently Mount Damo produces close to 200,000 kilograms of iron every month. However, due to the insufficient transportation capacity, a large amount of iron ore has been piled up on Mount Damo. At the same time, the smelting furnace and forging workshop at 19 Rivers also needed to be expanded. Also, the salt wells didn't have enough manpower and needed to be expanded. In addition, there are areas that need to be repaired in the city walls and government offices. As he spoke, Tong Zhinya took out a stack of paper with densely packed words written on it. Immediately, a guard took it and placed it on the desk in front of the Empress. Your Majesty, the frontline's rations are still 2 months short. Furthermore, the continuous battles over the past few months have greatly damaged their weapons. Many of the soldiers' weapons have already been used as iron plates. Also, the salary and rations of these auxiliary soldiers have not been decided yet. Even if we don't mention the monthly salary, His Majesty should still reward the auxiliary soldiers, Qin Chuan said. At this time, the two of them were surprisingly in sync. Your Majesty, the Ministry of Revenue only allocated 50% of last year's salary, and is still short by half. If we don't distribute it, I'm afraid that many officials won't be able to eat meat. Xiong Yaohe, the Minister of Rights, followed closely behind. It was a classic case of not eating meat. However, there was nothing wrong with it. Your Majesty, currently the Public Order Bureau, Zhu Yan, the Minister of Justice, immediately followed up with the Minister of Rights. The hall suddenly became like a market. A group of people stood below and shouted. Between the lines, there were only 3 words. Want money, want goods, want people. Your Majesty, you mustn't. Last year, many of the cities in the north suffered losses, and the allocation of money and rations consumed more than half of the national treasury. After that, many of the cities in the northeast were attacked by the Yun nation, and we also need to allocate food to help the people there tide over the difficulties. If all the money is transferred, it will only barely be enough to help the people in the destroyed cities survive until the spring harvest. We absolutely won't have any extra resources for other purposes. Tu Wan stepped forward with an ashen face, and her voice immediately overwhelmed everyone. In fact, they still owed the rearguard commandery a few months' worth of rations. The Empress couldn't send hungry soldiers. However, seeing Tu Wan's surging aura and knocking everyone aside, Renbaqian was very rational and didn't say anything. His physique wasn't like that of Tong Zhinya and the others. It didn't matter if they were hit, but if he was hit, he would be half dead. Well, The Baihu of the rearguard commandery were all rich people, so they shouldn't be short of rations and wouldn't starve to death for the time being. It was better to bring this matter up with the Empress later. All of you shut up. The Empress's face turned blue, and her hair began to flutter. Her aura was like a towering mountain, suppressing everyone. All of you step down. We will discuss this after an inventory. The Empress said coldly. Your Majesty. Tang Xinye was unwilling to give up, and wanted to say something. Step down. A bright red, square brick smashed into Tang Xinye's head, and it was immediately smashed into pieces. The feel of this thing was excellent, and the Empress had always been very accurate when throwing it. Unfortunately, the significance of this brick was far greater than its lethality. To Tang Xinye, it was no different from a piece of tofu smashing into his head. The lethality was probably less than a piece of tofu smashing into an ordinary person's head. He just wanted to tell everyone that the Empress was in a bad mood, and didn't want to talk to them. They were to quickly get lost, or else she would flip out. Seeing that the Empress was on the verge of losing her temper, everyone had no choice but to temporarily stop talking and step down. Ren Baqian was the last to leave, half a step behind the Empress. Your Majesty, it's not worth getting angry over this matter. Ren Baqian softly comforted the Empress from behind. Why should I be angry? The Empress, who was angry just now, turned her head and looked calm. It has been like this for so many years, and I am already used to it. The Empress looked at him and said, I just find them noisy. Ren Baqian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It turned out that the Empress could also put on an act. In any case, they will quarrel when they don't have money, and they will quarrel even when they have a little bit of money. I think that after we conquer the Yun nation and have money, they will stop quarreling, the Empress said. At that time, they will quarrel about other things, Ren Baqian said after thinking about it. When they are hungry, they think about filling their stomachs. After filling their stomachs, they want to wear warm clothes. When they are full and warm, they will think about other things. The ancients said it well. One thinks about sex when one is full. The Empress kicked Ren Baqian's calf, and he felt like he heard the sound of bones cracking. What do you think about sex when you are warm? The Empress looked at him coldly and asked. That's what the ancients said, not me. Ren Baqian hugged his legs and jumped around in circles. Kick him if you want. He was innocent. Umph. The Empress snorted. Actually, this is fake. Everything in the world is just a facade. It's fake and not real. If I feel pain, then it will be painful. If I see through this illusion, then I won't feel pain. Amitba. Ren Baqian took a long time before putting his leg down. He tried his best to maintain a calm expression and act like an enlightened monk. These days he had made great progress in his study of Buddhist scriptures. At this moment he felt that learning Buddhism was really good. Sometimes it was very useful. It was just like calming one's heart and cooling down naturally. The Empress kicked his other leg. Following which, she softened her tone and asked gently, Does it hurt? Ren Baqian's face twitched. Chapter 622. 3 days later, Ren Baqian brought his men out of the city and went to the captive camps to take a look. The situation made him frown. It was filthy, chaotic, and lifeless. Nearly 100,000 people were held in 3 captive camps. There were more than 30,000 people in each camp, and they were sleeping directly on the ground. Ren Baqian didn't know where Tang Xinye's previous arrangements went. Other than a fence around the 3 captive camps, there was nothing else. Everyone in the captive camps was dirty, and their faces couldn't be seen clearly. It was as if they had rolled out of the mud, and it was unknown how long it had been since they last bathed. They probably hadn't bathed since they were captured. Occasionally, they would raise their faces, but their eyes were still full of fear. Is this how you arrange these people? Ren Baqian furrowed his eyebrows. He saw that everyone was curled up in a pile here and there, and it was a complete mess. The most outrageous thing was that he actually saw 2 women among the crowd. It was easy to imagine how terrible it would be to have 2 women and a bunch of men huddled together. There was also defecation everywhere. From the moment he entered the camp, he had been smelling the lingering stench, which mixed with the rancid smell of the captives, almost making him faint. A large number of fly-like insects flew around the camp, annoying people. However, many of the captives couldn't be bothered to drive the insects away even if they landed on their bodies. "Sir, what's the problem?" Accompanying Renbachian was a captain, and a few captains. They were all transferred from the protectorate of the center to be the backbone of this auxiliary army. They were surprised to hear Renbachian's words. They looked at these people and felt that they were very honest. Those who stirred up trouble had all been killed. "Do you know what these people are used for?" Renbachian asked. "I don't know, sir," the captain answered honestly. "We need them to repair roads, bridges, cities, and mines. There are many things for them to do. If we want them to do these things, we first have to keep them alive and well. Only living people can do things. We didn't ask you to painstakingly escort them here from the Yun nation, so that their corpses can be buried in the soil to become fertilizer after they die." "Oh, I really thought they were going to be buried. It's said that the crops grow especially well when the corpses are buried." The commandant had a simple and honest look on his face. Last year, hundreds of thousands of corpses were buried in the north. After that, the crops in the north grew extremely well. "If they are dead, should I drag you to mine and build roads?" Renbachian really wanted to get someone to dig a hole and bury him. "Sir, what should we do?" The captain scratched his head and looked at Li Yi. Although it was a little dirty, it was still quite stable. These people wouldn't die if they were given food. "Let's continue watching first," Renbachian said with a straight face. He continued to walk around the captive camp and discovered more problems. Many of them were injured and moaning on the ground. However, there was no one to take care of them and no doctor to treat them. Many of their wounds were rotten and smelly. Those who were still alive were considered lucky. It was estimated that many of the people who had died along the way were injured like this. Moreover, many of the injuries on these people's bodies were caused by the journey. He didn't even need to ask to know how it was caused. During this period of time he saw them eating once. The food was unexpectedly good. It was meat soup filled with fragrant fatty meat and vegetables. When it was time to eat, it was chaos again. Pushing, trampling, and even brawling could be seen. The militiamen didn't seem to be surprised. They only went in with sticks and smashed the heads of more than a dozen people at the height of the disturbance. They even broke the limbs of 2 people to make the captives behave. They didn't care about anything else. After roughly walking around the 3 captive camps, Renbachian first ordered everyone to take a bath and set up some public toilets. He then frowned and returned to the palace before starting to write at a great speed. The situation in the captive camps had to be improved. These people couldn't be left lying on the ground. They also needed to build simple residences and improve their living conditions. Otherwise, not to mention the dew every morning and evening, a heavy rain would cause many of them to fall ill. If the weak ones didn't receive timely treatment, their lives would be very short. Then some ordinary doctors and apprentices would be assigned to them, so that they wouldn't die from minor illnesses that could be cured with a few herbs. The most important thing was the various systems. The systems for these captive camps had to be set up first. Nothing could be accomplished without rules. With rules, there would be order. With order, these captives would be able to survive. The first rule was the formation of the captives. These captives were to be organized into 10 large groups with 10,000 people in each group. Each large group was divided into 10 middle groups with 1,000 people in each group. Further down were the small groups with 100 people in each group. Further down were the small groups with 10 people in each group. At the same time, a captive would be selected to be the team leader to manage the group. The aboriginal militiamen would be the team leader, and the captives with high prestige would be the deputy team leader to assist in the management. In the future, all the actions of these captives would be done in small groups, regardless of whether it was work or living quarters. At the same time, men and women weren't allowed to mix in the small groups. Even if they were from the same family, they had to be separated. The most important thing was to implement the punishment system. If one person in the small group ran away, the whole small group would be punished. If one group ran away, the whole small group would be punished. At the same time, if someone in the small group caused trouble, everyone in the small group would be punished. If there was any negligence in the work of the small group, the entire small group would be punished. Following which, Renbachian wrote down dozens of rules, including everything that he had seen and everything that he could think of. This included everything from going to work in the morning, eating, finishing, sleeping, hygiene, daily behavior, and everything else. With these systems in place, the captive camps should be able to look more presentable. If there were any problems in the future, he could just add more to the list. However, there was an extremely important rule that he noted on another piece of paper. As a modern person, he wasn't used to using some people as slaves forever. He also understood that people needed a certain amount of hope to survive. He also understood the significance of a little hope for these captives. They would struggle to grasp the light in the darkness that was the size of a firefly. Renbachian needed to give them hope, and they would continue to move toward that little bit of hope and grasp it tightly. The hope he gave them was very simple, which was to give them freedom after a certain number of years. As long as they could live until then, they would be able to live like normal people in this world and reunite with their families. For this goal, these people would work hard to survive. At the same time, it would reduce a lot of uncertainties. Otherwise, if there was no hope at all, these people would either be thinking about how to escape or be like the Walking Dead. One could imagine the efficiency of this kind of work. The efficiency of doing something with hope and living day by day was completely different. Even though building a road wasn't a very meticulous project, it wasn't easy to do either. In particular, many places had to cross mountains and rivers. If there were any problems during this period and there was no hope, these people definitely wouldn't say anything because it had nothing to do with them. However, if they had a little subjective initiative and a certain reward and punishment system, they would take the initiative to point out the problems. Chapter 624. Renbachian sat in the garden for a long time with a pensive look on his face. It was as if he was recalling his lost youth and running under the sunset. Are you in a bad mood because you didn't disturb them? It was rare for the Empress to show concern for him. Her voice was soft and gentle. If it was any other time, Renbachian would definitely take advantage of her and climb as high as he could. However, he was preoccupied with other matters at this moment, so he didn't pay too much attention to it. It's not that I'm in a bad mood. Renbachian sorted out his emotions, sat up straight and said, in fact, what they said was right in some aspects. Just let those people work and give them their freedom. There's no need to pay them. Oh, the Empress replied plainly. She continued to look at him, as if she wanted to see through his inner thoughts. Did he give up so quickly? If that was the case, she would be disappointed. Regardless of whether it was right or wrong, he had to persevere on his own path and see the moment it blossomed and bore fruit. As for whether the fruit was bitter or sweet, he would only know when the time came. It was just like how she chose Renbachian as her husband. Even without the subsequent incidents, she wouldn't easily go back on her word. According to the words of Earth, even if they had to kneel, they had to walk the path they had chosen. However, they left out one thing. Renbachian raised his voice. After working for 8 years, many of them have become experts in the construction and road repair industries. In the next few decades, Dayo would need a lot of craftsmen, especially for cement buildings. It was difficult to find such a group of skilled craftsmen in a short period of time. It would be a pity to let these people go just like that. If he didn't give them hope, then they would definitely not put their minds on it. They would lack subjective initiative, and might even become walking corpses. Furthermore, we can't do this forever. After all, after swallowing up the Yun Nation, it will become a part of Dayo. The people of the Yun Nation will also be Her Majesty's people. Blindly using force was not a good choice. Ruling such a large piece of land and ruling over so many nations, His Majesty would be more suitable to be a virtuous ruler than a tyrant. If they followed the previous discussion and could become commoners after 8 years, they would definitely not stay. Even if they had nowhere else to go, they would still choose to return to their hometown. The captive camp had become one of the worst memories of their lives. The reason why I want to pay them wages is because I want to use them as craftsmen, and not as captives who are exploited blindly. Let them not feel too much resentment, and be grateful for His Majesty's kindness. Also, let them treat this as a way to make a living. Even if they are free at that time, with a change of heart, some of them will still stay. Even some of those who leave will return to this line of work when they have nowhere else to go. They will not feel too much resentment in their hearts. Oh, the Empress nodded thoughtfully. At the same time, there's one more thing. Dayo doesn't just need 100,000 captives. They might need hundreds of thousands or even millions of captives. With so many people, if they all returned home and returned to society, it would have a certain impact on the Yun nation that had just calmed down. One had to know that these people were people who had nothing. When the time came, there would definitely be people who would take risks out of desperation. This would not be beneficial to the rule. So, by keeping these people here, we can save a lot of manpower, and we can also divide the crowd and reduce the impact. Oh, the Empress nodded thoughtfully. She hadn't considered some of the things that Rinpochian mentioned. After all, it was easy for them to plunder a region, but they had no experience in ruling a region full of foreigners. Perhaps it couldn't be said that they had no experience at all. Their only experience was to drive all the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation into Tianjing Basin, guard the only exit, and let them fend for themselves. When the time comes, it won't be easy to make these people stay without using force. Rinpochian sighed. The Empress continued to nod her head thoughtfully. Although it was the easiest to do things with a knife to one's neck, it wasn't the most effective. I'll go back in a while and find a loudspeaker. Shall we compete in a louder voice? Rinpochian snorted. I can make you doubt your life. The voices of the people in the imperial court weren't soft. One person's voice could be as loud as the horn of a large truck. This was considered an innate skill of the aboriginals. Rinpochian estimated that Tang Jingye's voice could reach at least 100 decibels. However, it didn't matter. I'll get a loudspeaker that's 130 decibels, which is equivalent to the sound of an airplane taking off. It will be enough to make you doubt your life. The Empress looked at Rinpochian's face full of fighting spirit. After thinking about it, she decided not to tell him that the one with the biggest fist was the boss. She would tell them that the one with the biggest fist was the boss. In the afternoon, Rinpochian hurried back to Earth. The business license has been completed, the company has been established, and the address has been chosen. It's all here. In addition, you suddenly threw so many things at me. Do you want a pay raise? Shen Feng threw a stack of documents on the table in front of Rinpochian. She sat there and watched Rinpochian read the documents. She carefully observed his face and temperament, and found that he was becoming more and more ferocious. He looked a little like those guys whose brains were all muscles. In Rinpochian's hand was the plan to set up a martial arts center. 1 month in Dayo time and 3 months on Earth time. This plan was already on the fast track and had already begun to be implemented. Rinpochian had high expectations for this plan. In his opinion, it was much more important than the pharmaceutical factory. In fact, there was no comparison at all. Although martial arts had declined, the cultivation method would be announced sooner or later. At that time, the world would undergo tremendous changes, and the value of high-level martial artists would reach its peak. One had to know that cultivation was the direction of human evolution, and could prolong one's lifespan. To the rich, it was far more valuable than external objects. When the cultivation method was announced, the entire world's perception would suddenly change. At that time, every high-level martial artist would become a fragrant cake fought over by the rich. Even if they were to be used as personal trainers, they would still be of great value. Needless to say, when many high-level martial artists appeared in the world, it would be very difficult for ordinary people to face off against them with firearms. At that time, for their own safety, the rich would also need to recruit high-level martial artists. Furthermore, the cultivation of high-level martial artists was extremely long and couldn't be cultivated overnight. Furthermore, it wasn't something that could be easily cultivated by ordinary forces. If 1/3 or even half of the high-level martial artists came from their own martial arts centers, the value of this network alone would be immeasurable, not to mention the reputation and potential strength of the martial arts centers. Chapter 625. He could even order them around like the rear guard commandery, and use points to exchange for secret manuals. In order to obtain points, they had to complete missions. The secret manuals were the bait dangling in front of everyone, and they would find a way to swallow them no matter what. After mastering power, everyone wanted to go one step further and obtain more power. By mastering such a force, he would be able to become one of the top forces. Although he wouldn't be able to master weapons, these high-level martial artists were weapons themselves, and this was enough to attract attention. As for this, Ren Baqian believed that it wouldn't take too long. After all, paper couldn't wrap fire, and this matter would be discovered sooner or later. On one hand, the country would sooner or later increase the number of people practicing, and this kind of thing couldn't be hidden forever. Otherwise, it would lose its meaning of existence. It was most likely to be a small number of troops, such as the special forces. As long as there were a lot of people, it would be easy for the news to leak. On the other hand, the experts trained by the country couldn't always hide in the base. Once people had power, they wouldn't be willing to be mediocre. Think about it. If you had power that far exceeded ordinary people, would you be willing to hide? What if something happened to your family? What if your family is being bullied by others? As long as they did something, it would be easy for others to find out. Most importantly, after the establishment of the Martial Arts Center, as the strength of the martial artists trained by the Martial Arts Center increased, the country was forced to speed up the release of this matter. Therefore, no matter how he thought about it, this matter couldn't be hidden for long. Ren Baqian originally guessed that it would take at most 10 years to 15 years. Coupled with his own martial arts center, this speed would be even faster. It was likely to take 6 to 10 years. What could the pharmaceutical factory provide him in 15 years? Even if the annual profit was a few hundred million, or even a billion, it wouldn't be more than 10 billion in 15 years. It might seem like a lot, but 10 billion in 15 years would only be equivalent to a billion now. Although such a person was also rich, it couldn't be compared to what the Martial Arts Center could bring him. The Martial Arts Center not only brought him money, but it also brought him strength and a large network that spanned the entire world. Therefore, Ren Baqian had high expectations for this Martial Arts Center. He had already seen that the future world would inevitably change, so he had to grasp as much strength as possible before that happened. Only then would he be able to leap to the top of the world and watch everything happen when the time came. His time on Earth was limited. He only had 10 days a month on Earth. He didn't have the time or energy to invest in technology or other industries. Besides, he didn't know how to do it even if he wanted to. The 100 million plus dividends from the pharmaceutical factory and the tens of millions he had originally received would only amount to a little more than 200 million. It was an astronomical figure for ordinary people, but it was not enough to cause any waves in this world. On the contrary, everything that the martial arts club needed was his strong suit. So many experts and secret manuals were his greatest resources. Moreover, he was rushing to catch up with the tide of the upcoming great change. He would be a fool not to make good use of this. Ren Baqian looked through the things that Shenfeng handed over, made some arrangements, and dismissed her. He then gave Ren Wanyan a call. "Brother, it's been so many years. You finally remembered that you have a younger brother." Ren Wanyan was surprised when he received the call. It was the first time he had received a call from his brother, who had become more and more elusive since a few years ago. Not to mention himself. Even his parents had always complained that the fledglings had grown up. In the past, he would receive a call every 2 to 3 days after graduating from college. Now he only received a call once every 10 days to half a month. The two brothers chatted for a while before Ren Baqian asked, "Are you going to find a place for your internship at the end of the year? Do you have any plans?" "Brother, it's rare for you to think of me. Do you have a good job for me?" Ren Wanyan laughed. "Indeed, there are some things that I don't feel at ease without my family," Ren Baqian replied. After all, he was rarely on Earth and still needed someone to take charge. Although Shenfeng was efficient, she was gradually starting to feel powerless. After all, she had come into contact with more and more things, and many of them were starting to exceed her capabilities. Furthermore, her background was also a big problem. As for Ding Jia, although he was hardworking and willing to use his brain, he was a little timid due to his background. Although there were some changes after learning martial arts, it was still too early for him to take charge. Furthermore, there would be a lot of manpower needed in the future, so it was better to pull Renwanyan in as soon as possible. Brother, your way of thinking is outdated. You are now a professional manager. Although you can rest assured about the family business, there are still a lot of troublesome issues and constraints when it comes to development. I already have someone who wants me. Renwanyan laughed heartily. Oh, what's better than the opportunity one have here? Rinpochian asked with a smile. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Although it didn't feel like much time had passed, his younger brother had grown up. I have the same status as you, Renwanyan whispered in a mysterious tone. Although someone wanted him to keep it a secret, as a student without professional training, he didn't have a strong sense of confidentiality. It wasn't easy for him to hold back from telling his classmates, friends, and parents. Now that Rinpochian asked him about it, he finally couldn't hold it in anymore. Although Rinpochian rarely went home and rarely called him in the past few years, they had been together since they were young, so he was still very close to this brother of his. Moreover, he always felt that his brother wasn't at the same level as him. He had seen a lot of people and things and could help him come up with some ideas. Therefore, he leaked the information to Rinpochian. My status? Rinpochian asked. Soon after, he thought of a possibility and asked, a state agency? Although he rarely used this identity, everyone in his family knew that he had this identity. It was only because he went to Lu province to help Renwanyan solve his problem that he revealed this identity. That's right, Renwanyan replied. Rinpochian frowned. Renwanyan was just an ordinary third-year university student. What qualifications did he have to enter a state agency? He was entering a state agency, not an ordinary civil servant. Even if he was a civil servant, it wasn't time for him to take the exam yet. In that case, it could only be because of him. The state definitely wouldn't let him go so easily, and would definitely do everything possible to tie him to the state. Renwanyan was one of them. Is it a research institute or a special affairs agency? Or is it a base? Rinpochian asked in a deep voice. Brother, do you know? Renwanyan was a little surprised. There were too many state agencies, and most people hadn't even heard of some of them. However, Rinpochian managed to guess it, which surprised him. Forget it, don't go. They are using you as a rope. Rinpochian said. What do you mean? Brother, what do you know? Renwanyan raised his voice and asked. Come to me. You will know when you have the chance in the future. I will let them know and they won't look for you again, Rinpochian said faintly. Brother, you are so powerful? Renwanyan asked in surprise. More powerful than you think. You will know when you come to work for me in the future. For example, when you enter a certain department, you have to be respectful to the leaders. When you come to work for me, you can do whatever you want and ignore them if you don't want. Rinpochian's tone was very calm, but Renwanyan felt that his brother was really different. Chapter 626. The next day, a pair of brothers in their 40s came to the villa. They looked almost identical. He was wearing a tang suit and was very thin. He had a mustache and thick knuckles on both of his hands. These two people from the martial arts world were hired by Rinpochian to train the winged cavalry. It was not martial arts, but some etiquette and methods of traditional martial arts. After all, the winged cavalry was too crude and barbaric. After all, modern society was a civilized society. No matter what it was, it had to be covered with a layer of civilized clothing. Only then would it be easier for people to accept it and appear to be of a higher class. His business license was a martial arts culture company. At least it had the word culture in it. Another reason was that there might be challengers after he opened a martial arts center. Rinpochian was afraid that they would seriously injure or kill someone. As such, he needed to find someone to teach them. Through some people, he hired these two people from the martial arts world. His kung fu wasn't considered high, but even if it was useless. No matter how high his kung fu was, he wouldn't be able to reach the man-will level. Currently, those man-will experts were in a certain base in the country. Even if they were at the man-will level, they would be slapped into a wall by the winged cavalry. As a result, he found these two people through certain people to train the winged cavalry warriors. However, they were dumbfounded when they arrived outside the villa. He saw 7 or 8 burly men holding huge barbells as dumbbells in the courtyard. It was the kind that weighed at least 200 to 300 kilograms. There were thick plates of barbells on the side, and one in each hand was flipped up and down. The two of them almost thought that it was made of wood. In the end, someone threw the barbell to the side, and it immediately smashed a deep hole in the ground. Seeing this scene, the two of them were puzzled. With this level of skill, what else did he need them to do? Are there monsters in this yard? The two of them even had the thought of returning home on the spot. However, after thinking about it, they decided to give Rinpoche a call. After all, it was not easy to make money in the traditional martial arts industry, especially when the two of them had no roots, no sect to rely on, and no idea how to make money. Moreover, the other party had offered a lot of money. With this money, he wouldn't have to worry for a few years. After receiving the call, Rinpoche called out from the window, and a winged cavalry warrior walked toward the main gate. When the two of them saw the approaching winged cavalry, they immediately felt an immense mental pressure. When two people meet on a narrow path, the fat one wins. This was also useful in the martial arts world. All kinds of fighting competitions were divided into weight classes. Even the heavyweight class had a great advantage in terms of strength and endurance. The person in front of him was obviously a heavyweight. The other party's aura also made the two of them feel very uneasy. It was as if he was facing a ferocious tiger that was about to devour him. Before coming here, the two of them still had some confidence. However, after seeing this person, their confidence was immediately thrown out of the window. Most of the time, one would be able to sense the disparity between them without even having to compete. This was especially true for veterans like the two of them. They were good at judging people and sensing danger. The winged cavalry warrior sized up the two of them and said, "Follow me, the lady boss is waiting for you." After hearing this, the two of them thanked him and followed the winged cavalry through the courtyard. When they passed by those people, they had goosebumps all over their bodies. It was as if they were passing by a group of tigers. Before they entered the door, they thought they would see a beautiful young woman or something. However, when they entered the door, they saw a young man sitting on the sofa watching the news. When he saw the two of them, he nodded as a greeting. The two of them were still wondering who this person was when they heard the burly man who brought them here say, "Lady boss, he's here." F***ck off. Rinpoche raised his eyebrows, grabbed a fruit knife, and threw it over. The lady boss was actually a man. The two brothers immediately thought of the wrong person. Coupled with the intimidating burly men outside, they immediately thought of Invincible East and Yang Lianting. In the blink of an eye, this villa had become the legendary Blackwood Cliff. Rinpoche didn't notice their thoughts. After chatting with them for a while, he called the winged cavalry warrior in and said, "These two will be your etiquette teachers from now on. As usual, you can't hit, scold, threaten, or drink or play finger-guessing games with the teachers." As Rinpoche spoke, a layer of sweat appeared on their foreheads. After Rinpoche finished speaking, their backs were penetrated. These people. Got it, lady boss. Rinpoche's eyes widened and the corners of his eyes twitched. He couldn't escape being called the lady boss anymore. This bunch of idiots was getting naughtier and naughtier. 2 days later, Rinpoche returned to Dayo with an oversized loudspeaker. The next day, early in the morning, Rinpoche appeared in front of the palace and waited outside with everyone. He held a loudspeaker that was half the size of a person in one hand and a box in the other. He attracted a lot of attention again. "Sir Run, haven't you given up yet?" Shirqing stepped forward and asked when he saw Rinpoche. "There are always some things that have to be said. The old ways are already outdated," Rinpoche replied. "I'm looking forward to Sir Ren's ideas, but don't be too hasty." Shirqing laughed. Rinpoche cupped his hands in gratitude. After a while, everyone entered the main hall. The Empress sat at the top, glanced at everyone's faces and said, "I have something to report." "Your Majesty, I have something to say." Rinpoche stepped forward without waiting for the others to speak. In fact, the others were also waiting for him to speak. After all, looking at his posture, it seemed like he was here to talk about something. "Speak." Everyone. Do you still remember what our goal is in this war with the Yun nation? This time, we aren't going on horseback to rob and leave. Instead, we are going to occupy the entire Yun nation and incorporate it into Daeyo's territory. In the past, Daeyo even needed your majesty to use the palace's treasury to subsidize our weapons. Why is that? It's because even though Daeyo has a vast territory, it doesn't have an abundance of minerals. Therefore, we have to incorporate the Yun nation into our territory, develop Daeyo with their mineral resources and technology, and supplement Daeyo with their resources. Everyone understood what Rinpochian said, and didn't have any objections. However, ruling a region isn't as simple as drawing a circle on the map and ruling over it. For example, what's the difference between having Tianjin Basin and not having it? We still have to expend troops to deal with them. The Yun nation is more important than Tianjin Basin, and needs to be governed steadily in order to use its technology and resources to develop Daeyo. We can't be like before and order the local people around like cattle and horses. Tyranny works for a while but not forever. Do you all still remember how the Hao nation perished? Sir Ren, how can the Hao nation be compared to our dynasty? Furthermore, the Yin nation humph. Qin Chuan said with disdain when he mentioned the Yun nation. The Hao nation naturally can't be compared to our dynasty, and the Jing tribe can't be compared to the aboriginals. However, if we use tyranny to drive the people away, in the eyes of others, your majesty will be viewed the same as how the late emperor and the martyrs viewed the Hao nation. Water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it. The rise and fall of the previous dynasties have proven this point, Rinpochian said in a powerful voice. As long as there are millions of aboriginals, so what if they are restless? Qin Chuan said even though he understood Rinpochian's words. Argumentative spirit. Rinpochian suddenly thought of this word. Force doesn't mean everything. Development is still the most important thing in the future. The future development will far exceed your imagination, and everything in the future will be completely different from the past. In order to achieve the blueprint in your majesty's heart, everything must pave the way for peaceful development. Rinpochian cupped his hands toward the Empress. Isn't this the way the world is? What's so unimaginable about it? Qin Chuan sneered. The blueprint in His Majesty's heart is that everyone can live a good life, no longer troubled by sickness and illness, food and clothing. Every child can go to school and learn knowledge that they are interested in. Everyone can have food to eat and books to read. Everyone can think for themselves. Everyone can have their own pursuits. Everyone no longer lives for the sake of survival, but lives for the sake of self-worth. Your Majesty's blueprint is for everyone in the world to be like dragons. Rinpochian began to raise the banner. This was what the Empress envied when she first arrived on Earth. It was also something that she couldn't forget. Of course, for the current Daeyo, this was similar to achieving communism. However, if it was the blueprint in the Empress's heart, there wasn't any problem. After hearing what Rinpochian said, the Empress recalled what she had seen, heard, and felt when she first arrived on Earth. She recalled her envy of that world. Although the Empress's expression didn't change, she was overwhelmed with emotions. As expected, Rinpochian knew what she was thinking. Chapter 627. In fact, apart from the Empress, his words sounded like a dream to everyone else and were completely impossible to achieve. It was like someone saying that everyone would have an endless supply of gold in their home in the future. It was completely a dream. Many people even felt that this idea was too exaggerated. At the same time, they had a conjecture. Everyone knew that the Empress had changed a lot in the past year and trusted Rinpochian a lot. After listening to Rinpochian's words, they wondered if the Empress's change was due to his words. A world where everyone was like a dragon might interest the Empress, but it was impossible to achieve. They couldn't let the Empress immerse herself in this unrealistic idea. Nonsense. Tu-Wan raised her eyebrows and reprimanded him. Are you questioning Her Majesty's grand plan? Rinpochian sneered. I'm not questioning Her Majesty. Please don't blame me, but I have a few words to say. Tu-Wan cupped her hands at the Empress, stepped forward, and stared at Rinpochian. However, Sir Ren, what are you trying to achieve by using such words to confuse Her Majesty? My goal is to achieve Her Majesty's goal. What Her Majesty thinks is what I want to do. Where Her Majesty is looking is where I want to go, Renbaqian said while looking at Tuan. The Empress nodded gently. Renbaqian's words made her feel very comfortable. Sir Ren, do you think what you said can come true? Qin Chuan asked. Of course, it will come true in a few decades at most. Renbaqian was full of confidence. With the speed of technological development, it wasn't impossible to reach that stage as long as one could point out the key points. Even if there weren't enough talents. Even if they couldn't reach that stage, it wouldn't be difficult for everyone to have food to eat and education to read. What happened when China was first established, and what would happen in a few decades? When China was first established, who would have thought that it would reach that stage in 60 or 70 years? Moreover, Dayo was a powerful country. Even if its productivity was much worse than before, it would still be able to reach a stage that no one could even dream of. If they didn't take any detours and only corrected the problems, they would be able to reach a stage that no one could even dream of. A few decades? Tuan sneered. Who knew what would happen in a few decades? Would they let him do whatever he wanted? Even if they found out that everything they said was false, could they still kill Her Majesty's husband as a sacrifice to the heavens? A few decades is too far. I can't see it, Tuan said decisively. Tuan turned to the Empress and said, What Sir Run said is excellent, but forgive me for speaking bluntly, I feel that it's impossible to achieve. Ko Zhihai, Qin Chuan, Tong Zhinya, Xianhua and the others also responded. Even though Tong Zhinya and Renbaqian had a good relationship, this was a completely different matter. Tong Zhinya didn't wish for Renbaqian to convince Her Majesty to take Dayo down an impossible path. Renbaqian's voice was immediately drowned out by the crowd. If the voices of the crowd were like the surging waves of the sea, then his voice was like a lone boat in the sea that could capsize at the slightest wave and sink to the bottom of the sea. It was impossible to find him. More than a dozen loud voices that reached 100 decibels expressed their opinions, instantly turning the court into a vegetable market. Today no one mentioned anything about the captive camp. Everyone was criticizing what Renbaqian had just said. It was as if they had to wake up the Empress, who had been bewitched by Renbaqian. And all of them looked distressed. Renbaqian sneered, raised the megaphone and said, Hello, hello, hello? Silence. With an ear-piercing sound, Renbaqian's voice directly suppressed everyone. Everyone heard him shout silence. Even the guards on the imperial city wall in the distance turned to look in the direction of the main hall, with a curious look on their faces. Who exactly was speaking in such a loud voice? It was a full 130 decibels. Renbaqian's voice was like a lion's roar, and everyone was shocked. This was the case of the unreasonable meeting the more unreasonable, and the louder meeting the louder. Everyone was shocked and stared strangely at the huge megaphone in Renbaqian's hand. They knew that Renbaqian had a purpose for bringing that strange thing, but they didn't expect it to be for this purpose. Renbaqian was very satisfied with this voice. Sure enough, one couldn't speak too softly in court. Only a loud voice would have the right to speak. The next time I get anxious, I'll use a 300 decibels ship's megaphone to perish together with you. No matter how big the Aboriginals' main hall was, it was still an enclosed space. 180 decibels was equivalent to the sound of a ton of TNT exploding from 70 meters away. If a 300 decibels megaphone was used in the main hall, everyone would probably be dumbfounded and have to rely on hearing aids for the rest of their lives. Renbaqian was determined. In fact, he had already expected everyone's reaction. After all, this was a difference in vision and philosophy. He also knew that if he didn't involve the court in the past, and everything was done slowly, such a thing wouldn't have happened. If things were like now, it would easily cause a backlash from a large number of people. How many of the reformers in ancient times had a good ending? Although Dayo didn't have that many traditional powers, the related interests and different philosophies would inevitably cause hostility from some people. Just like yesterday, he didn't want to affect the interests of others. If he touched the purse of the Ministry of Revenue, it would inevitably affect the other departments. In addition, if he didn't care about the annexation of the Yun nation, He didn't know how long he would have to take detours and how long he would have to clean up the mess. Rinpoche had great confidence in the ability of the Aboriginals to govern. They would definitely mess it up. Therefore, if he wanted the future to go according to his and the Empress's plans, he had to stand up and make a voice. Sirs, please listen to me. Rinpoche held the megaphone and spoke to the entire hall. This thing is interesting. Tongjinya touched his chin and thought that Rinpoche's voice could be so loud while speaking to this thing. If he were to use it, he was afraid that the whole city would hear him. Tongjinya wanted to snatch the thing from Rinpoche's hands when he imagined the scene of the whole city shaking. However, he suppressed this thought when he thought that the Empress was still sitting there. Everyone, do you think that Her Majesty will be deceived and put her mind on an impossible goal? Rinpoche asked. Tongjinya. Qinchuan. Tuan. The rest. No one spoke. They all turned to look at Rinpoche in unison. The back of their heads was facing the Empress, and their faces were filled with "that's right." No matter how powerful Her Majesty was, she was only in her 20s. Even though she was the most powerful Aboriginals, everyone still felt that she had been bewitched by Rinpoche. Looking at the land where Great Xia was located, many wise emperors in history had been bewitched, let alone Her Majesty. F***ck. Rinpoche cursed in his heart. What do you mean by that expression? Can it be any more obvious? Is Her Majesty that stupid? All of you turn around. The Empress saw everyone turn around in unison, and saw something from Rinpoche's face. Her face immediately turned black, and her hair began to flutter. Of course, Her Majesty won't be deceived. Everyone turned around and immediately changed their expressions as if they had practiced face-changing in a Sichuan opera. All of you have a strong desire to live. Rinpoche really wanted to say this. The Empress's gaze swept across everyone's faces. Her gaze was like a knife, and her ice-cold touch brushed across everyone's face. Continue. The Empress said. Don't tell me you think that Her Majesty will be bewitched by me? Rinpoche asked insidiously. Everyone. The Empress's seat suddenly became empty. A red figure passed through the hall, and more than a dozen people were shot into the wall by the Empress. Chapter 628. Everyone pulled themselves down from the wall, and felt as if their bones had fallen apart. They hated Rinpoche to death, but they looked honest on the surface. They naturally knew that they had been tricked by Rinpoche, but they couldn't control their expressions. If they could control their expressions, they wouldn't be Aboriginals. In fact, most of them had strange expressions on their faces at that time. Many of them tried their best to remain calm, but their faces were distorted. Do you think I'm ignorant and easy to bully? The Empress said with a murderous look. She squinted her phoenix eyes and scanned the people below. We don't dare. Everyone quickly said, but their expressions betrayed them. Seeing this, the Empress became even angrier. Her upper body swayed, and a series of bricks flew out and smashed into everyone's heads. Immediately, the hall was filled with broken pieces flying all over the place. Since you don't dare, then shut up. The Empress was domineering. Rinpoche then continued. Let's talk about your concerns first. The national treasury is empty. With the current situation, it's already good enough to maintain the status quo. If the money is used for other purposes, there will be a shortage somewhere. Rinpoche finally said something that everyone was willing to hear. However, everything is developing and changing. The Yun nation is smaller than Dayo, but the annual revenue from the national treasury is 5.5 times that of Dayo. It's 5,000 taels of silver, which is half of Great Xia's. This is under the circumstances where the warlords of the Yun nation have their own armies, and it's difficult for central orders to spread throughout the country. Why? Why does the national treasury's revenue far exceed that of Dayo under such circumstances? Rinpoche asked. Everyone was silent as this was a slap in the face. The Yun nation is rich in minerals. However, as far as I know, a large portion of the minerals in the Yun nation are also given to the warlords. Only some of the gold and silver mines are controlled by the imperial court. In fact, you all know that the Yun nation is prosperous with commerce. A large portion of the revenue from the Yun nation's treasury comes from taxes. The cities of the Yun nation only pay half of the taxes to the imperial court every year, which is a total of 30 million taels of silver. The tax revenue of the entire Yun nation can reach at least 60 million taels of silver every year. In fact, Deo has also formulated taxes according to the Hao nation's system. The annual revenue is about half of the national treasury's revenue, which is about 5 million taels of silver. Most of this 5 million taels of silver comes from the taxes paid by merchants from various countries. Of course, one of the reasons was that the late emperor sympathized with the people and reduced taxes. Another reason was that Deo didn't have any commerce. There is also a lack of commercial soil. The fundamental reason for this was that the commoners did not have money. Most of the time, they were still at the stage of bartering and exchanging for survival necessities. Naturally, there was no commercial ground, and naturally, there was no tax. Only when the common people became rich would they be able to form the soil for commerce. Only then would there be more taxes, and the national treasury would be more abundant. This was a virtuous cycle. A country would only be prosperous if its people were prosperous. If the people are poor, the country can't be rich. Renbachian began to lecture everyone. Tu Wan and the other officials of the Ministry of Revenue were deep in thought. They had thought of many of these things. After all, they had been in this position for so many years, it was impossible for them to not think of anything. However, it was the first time he had heard of this saying that the country would only be prosperous if the people were prosperous. Thinking about it, it made some sense. However, even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice. Even if they knew, they couldn't change the current situation. Or rather, they didn't have the ability to change the current situation. If you want all the people to become rich, you must first develop the country. This is a contradiction. Only when the country develops will the people be prosperous. When the people are prosperous, the country will have more taxes, the national treasury will have more wealth, and Deo will be able to develop. If you want to move forward step by step, you don't know how long it will take. However, there is a shortcut now, and that is the Yun nation. The resources and wealth of the Yun nation are what we want. As long as the Yun nation is incorporated into Deo, first of all, the national treasury will be full. Secondly, we can use this wealth to accelerate the development of Deo. However, do we rely on robbing to obtain the wealth of the Yun nation? Robbing without governance is a one-sided deal. It will only drag the Yun nation into a quagmire and become what Deo is now. This time, Renbachian didn't talk about the blueprint. Instead, he talked about how the country would develop and the source of its income. After he finished speaking, he paused for a while and waited for everyone to digest his words. What he said was very simple, and even an ordinary junior high school student could understand it. However, these Deo officials took a long time to digest it, and they were all deep in thought. It wasn't that the junior high school students on Earth were smarter than these Deo officials, but that the information channels of both parties were completely different. What they learned and knew was also completely different. Renbachian had something else to say, but he swallowed it back down. When a backward civilization ruled an advanced civilization, it would cause a regression of civilization and wealth in the early stages. This had been proven many times. In Deo, this situation was even more serious because the Aboriginals believed too much in force and didn't know much about other things. For example, the original Hao nation was ruled by the Aboriginals for 70 years. As a result, it was clear from the situation of the people in Tianjin Basin. Principal Run, continue with your ideas. After a while, Shiqing looked up and smiled at him. Therefore, we can't destroy the Yun nation. Instead, we have to develop it peacefully and maintain its prosperity. The annual income is at least tens of millions of taels of silver, which is enough to fill the national treasury. With Her Majesty's ruling power, she definitely won't let the cities of the Yun nation have their own armies like before. The annual income is at least 50 to 60 million taels of silver. Then, the talents and wealth of the Yun nation will be used to drive the development of Deo. Renbachian's idea was China's national policy. On the one hand, the entire country should develop science and technology. On the other hand, The rich should drive the rich of the later generations. That's why I mentioned treating the captives well and paying them wages. Other things are fine, but not this. Tu-Wan exploded when she heard Renbachian mention money. Even though Tu-Wan was a woman, if he had a choice, he really wanted to kick her out of the family. He didn't need to say anything. At this moment, the Empress finally opened her mouth and shouted, "Tu-Wan, shut up." Her aura was also released, pressing down on Tu-Wan like a huge mountain. What we need to do now is to build 3 cement roads, strengthen the transportation force, and ensure that there are no obstacles. The first road leads to the Yun Nation, which is the most important. One leads to Ping City, and the other leads to the 60,000 mountains. In addition to these 3 roads, there is also a lot of infrastructure construction. Therefore, the number of laborers required isn't a small number. We need millions of laborers. This time, we want to bring the Yun Nation under Your Majesty's rule, so we can't blindly exploit them like before. On the one hand, we have to deal with the public opinion of the Yun Nation. On the other hand, we have to give these people some hope and give them the hope of survival in order to maximize their effectiveness. Therefore, these people will have to be released sooner or later. By then, these people will already be skilled craftsmen, so we have to think of a way to keep them here. Renbachian repeated what he had said to the Empress before. From the value of these craftsmen to the impact that millions of prisoners of war would have on society after returning to the Yun Nation, he explained the importance of keeping these people here. By the time he finished speaking, it was already noon, and Renbachian's mouth was dry from talking. He looked at Tu-Wan, who was drenched from head to toe. The Empress's aura was firmly locked onto her, making her feel like she was carrying a huge mountain. She couldn't even open her mouth. "Your Majesty, let go of Minister Tu." Renbachian turned to the Empress. Tu-Wan then staggered and almost fell to the ground. "After we occupy the Yun Nation, it may not be as Principal Ren said. I won't agree to pay them unless someone else takes this position," Tu-Wan said stubbornly as soon as she steadied herself. Fortunately, apart from Tu-Wan, everyone else was thinking about Renbachian's words. In fact, the Ministry of Revenue's situation will have greatly improved by then. However, if you are worried about the state treasury being empty, there is no need to pay real money. You can first issue vouchers to the captive camp to replace the use of silver. After that, you can settle the payment with the merchants who provide the supplies. After Renbachian finished speaking, someone immediately asked about the vouchers. Renbachian explained the vouchers again. In fact, they were ordinary paper vouchers that could be exchanged for silver, but there was no need to take out the silver immediately. Using the vouchers as an opportunity, Renbachian was also preparing to create banks and banknotes. These people would be the first users of banknotes. After they were released, it would be easy for them to accept banknotes. He had long had enough of people carrying a bag of gold for him when he went out to buy things. Also, if the state treasury doesn't improve its tax collection, I will be responsible for paying for it, Renbachian finally said. I have a glass factory and spices. You won't doubt my ability to pay for it, right? What Principal Ren said makes sense. Shiqing was the first to nod, and everyone else agreed. Renbachian's words had indeed convinced them. Not only did they not doubt Renbachian's ability to pay for it, but they were also envious of the income from the spices. It wasn't that they didn't know the amount of spices harvested this time. After all, many people were paying attention to this matter. If Renbachian were to sell all the spices this time around, it could be said that he had earned 10 years' worth of the imperial family's income. Therefore, everyone had no doubt that this matter would be settled as long as the Empress agreed. In any case, those things belonged to the Empress. As for the Empress, she naturally wouldn't object at this time. This time, even Tu-Wan didn't object. It was fine as long as the money wasn't taken out from the state treasury. If it was really as Renbachian said, there would be tens of millions of taels of silver every year. In that case, the money could be taken out from the state treasury. Since Tu-Wan didn't speak, the others wouldn't either. Renbachian's mouth was dry from all the talking. When he returned to the Empress's quarters, he drank a few big bowls of water. In any case, he had finally convinced them to carry out this idea. Chapter 629. Both of Renbachian's eyes were tightly shut, and a layer of earthy yellow color flashed across his body, following which that layer of earthy yellow color gradually shrunk, concentrated at a point on his chest, and gradually disappeared. However, his body was covered in a layer of sweat. After a short while, he opened his eyes and woke up. His body wasn't as tired as it was after cultivating, but was full of energy. Renbachian clenched his fist and felt that his strength had increased a little. He brandished his fists again, this time at a faster speed. It had been half a year since his last breakthrough, and he had finally broken through again. After breaking through the visualization of Earth, other than increasing his strength and speed, his internal organs had also been strengthened. This was the most unique aspect of the Rui visualization. At the very least, other cultivation techniques didn't have this effect. All of the techniques were external to internal. Only this Rui visualization, of unknown origins, was a combination of internal and external cultivation. Cultivating each of the 5 visions would strengthen the corresponding internal organs. After breaking through the visualization of Earth, his spleen had been strengthened. The spleen contained one's will, which affected the activity of one's thoughts. Renbachian felt that he would become smarter and sharper after breaking through to this level. However, this could not be verified yet. It had only been a year since he started practicing Rui visualization, but he had already completed 4 levels. Visualization of water, visualization of wood, visualization of fire, and visualization of earth. All that was left was the visualization of metal, after which he would be able to break through to the earth will level. At that time, he would be considered an earth will expert. Of course, this 1 year was in quotation marks. In fact, including the time on Earth, it was a full 2 years. He had also eaten some natural treasures, such as Su Wen's peaches, which he had already eaten 4 of. He had also killed Lu Pinghai and obtained the spirit primary pill. He had also exchanged the electric baton with Ning Kaichen for the Shueka. However, after reaching this step, more than half of the medicinal power stored in his body had been used up. If he wanted to break through to the next level, he would need more time. Renbachian had no choice but to admit that his innate talent wasn't considered outstanding. Fortunately, he had a large number of herbs and treasures that allowed him to reach this stage. When he reached the earth will level, he would be able to marry the Empress. When he thought of marrying the Empress, he would be able to embrace a woman who was at the top of the world. When he thought of the Empress's request, his heart was filled with anticipation. At that time, would the Empress be shy and bashful? It was definitely impossible for her to act like an ordinary girl. At that time, she wouldn't become angry out of embarrassment, right? Renbachian felt that he still needed to learn martial arts such as the Golden Bell Shield and Iron Skin technique. It was much more important than the Fist of Death or the Hunter technique. After lying in bed for a long time, he finally fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, Renbachian got dressed and headed to Black Bamboo Academy. It had been a week since the debate in the Imperial Court. Today was a special day for the Black Bamboo Academy, the start of the second batch of students. This time there were 80 new students. Almost all of the good-for-nothings in the Imperial Court had been sent here last time. This time, there were very few children of officials who had been selected. Commoners made up the majority of the students, a total of 76 people. Early in the morning, Renbachian stood at the entrance of the academy with his hands clasped behind his back. In the distance, there were a few students laughing and waiting to see what his junior brothers and sisters were like. Greetings, Principal. Not long after, 2 teenagers came over together. When they saw Renbachian standing there, they immediately bowed respectfully. Then they signed their names on the table beside them and followed Renbachian's directions to the newly built classroom in the second row. Following the arrival of these 2, the other students also rushed over. The previous batch of students were pointing at them from afar. This group of students wasn't smart at other times, but they were self-taught now when they put on airs as seniors. When everyone arrived, Renbachian closed the door and moved the robot into the classroom to teach the first batch of students. The robot this time was custom-made after Tong Lan tore it apart. Compared to the previous robot, it was more technologically advanced and had a better artificial intelligence. Renbaqian moved the robot into the room and removed the cloth covering it. The students in the classroom were all dumbfounded. It can't be right. How is this possible? Then, all of them turned their heads to Tong Lan with expressions of shock. This time the appearance wasn't that of a Gundam, but Tong Jingya. Furthermore, it was a lifelike Tong Jingya. At least, the head didn't look much different. The upper body was still that of a real person. Furthermore, the muscles were specially made according to Tong Jingya's style, and were covered in the clothes that Tong Jingya always wore. As for the lower body, it had 4 legs. Renbaqian glanced at Tong Lan, and saw that she was indeed sitting there with a dull look on her face. She pointed at the robot, and opened her mouth for a long time. Grandpa? Renbaqian chuckled in his heart. This time you can tear it apart. Tear it apart. If you dare to tear it apart, I will dare to tell that old bastard Tong Jingya that your granddaughter dismembered you. If anyone else dared to tear it apart, Tong Lan would fight it out with them. Grandpa! Tong Lan came back to her senses after a long time and screamed. That's impossible. I just saw Grandpa this morning. This is fake. Nonsense. This is your tutor, not Minister Tong. He just looks a little similar. Renbaqian glared at her. Of course this is fake. Is there a need to ask? If Tong Lan hadn't seen Tong Jingya this morning, she wouldn't have thought that I modified her grandpa into this, right? Everyone was stunned. It wasn't just a little similar. It was exactly the same, except for the 4 legs below. Then why does it look exactly like my grandpa? Tong Lan slammed the table, shattering it into pieces. Her hair stood on end. How would I know why they look exactly the same? This thing is just like humans. They all look different, but there is a small probability that they look similar. This situation is called a face-to-face collision. Renbaqian said confidently. Everyone had a doubtful look on their faces. Is this for real? In any case, he will be your tutor from now on. When I'm not around, ask him anything you don't know. As for the method, it will be the same as before, Renbaqian said. After he finished speaking, Renbaqian ignored everyone, and went to speak to the new students. Fortunately, almost all the students this time were commoners. They were much more obedient than Tong Lan's batch, so Renbaqian didn't waste too much of his time. He then found a student to teach them the 3-character classic and simplified Chinese characters. Previously, there was only one batch of students, and Renbaqian could barely teach them all. This time, there was another batch of students. Renbaqian had to find a few commoners with better grades from the previous batch of students to be his teaching assistants, and rotate them every day. With the assistance of the robot, he could barely teach 2 batches of students. As soon as Renbaqian left the classroom, Li Fu grabbed him by the collar and asked, "Kid, when can you make what I want?" Haste makes waste. Sir Tong has already sent people to the south to look for rubber. They have already found it, and are sending it back. If these things are what I want, we can start making them soon, Renbaqian said unhurriedly. Kid, hurry up. I can't wait any longer. Li Fu let go of Renbaqian, flipped over, and landed on the roof. He wasn't so anxious in the past, but after seeing Renbaqian release the Kongming lanterns during the new year, he felt as if grass had grown in his heart, and he couldn't wait to fly into the sky. Renbaqian waved at Li Fu and left on his own. Chapter 630. Although it was Dayo's new year and the lantern-grabbing contest, the progress of the steam train made by the students hadn't fallen behind at all. Even during the holidays, the students would still go to the school for a day. After school on the first day, Renbaqian went to the backyard to take a look. The steam train had already taken shape. However, the problem was that there wasn't enough iron. Even though the steam train was much smaller and simpler than the ones Renbaqian had seen before, the amount of iron was still less than half. Renbaqian looked for the Empress and transferred 8,000 kilograms of iron to the school. Including the previous one, there was a total of 5,000 kilograms of iron to make this steam train, and lay a circle of rails in the backyard of the school. After that, Renbaqian went to the captive camp. Currently, there were 80,000 captives in the camp. More than 10,000 of them had already been sent to other places to mine gravel. Next, some would be arranged to expand the cement factory. and the rest would be sent to build roads. Ren Baqian walked around the captive camp. Although it still didn't meet his requirements, it was already much better than before. With the implementation of the regulations, especially after the division of the captive camp into groups, small groups, medium groups, and large groups, the camp was organized according to the large groups and was now much more orderly. At the same time, the environment in the camp was much cleaner. Everyone was forced to take a bath, and there was a public toilet every 100 meters. This prevented diseases from spreading easily in the camp. Ren Baqian walked around, pointed out 2 places that he felt were inappropriate, and asked the auxiliary commandant to find a few deputy captains and team leaders to inquire about the situation here. When the 4 of them saw Ren Baqian, they were very cautious and fearful. "How's the camp now?" Ren Baqian asked as he sat in a newly built wooden house with green sprouts. Pretty good, pretty good. There's meat to eat every day," the few of them quickly replied, afraid that they would offend the person in front of them. "Oh, if there's any problem, it's best to say it now. After this there won't be another chance," Ren Baqian said indifferently. "There's no problem, but sir, will we really be released?" someone asked cautiously. He didn't dare to believe the news when he heard it. Not only him, but many people in the camp also didn't dare to believe such a good thing. However, they didn't dare to disbelieve it. Having such hope was better than dying here. 8 years. You can leave after 8 years. Whether it's true or not, you'll know when the time comes. However, before that, all of you have to work hard and live well," Ren Baqian said faintly. "Thank you for informing me, my lord." "Thank you, my lord." "If there's nothing else, you may leave," Ren Baqian said faintly. "My lord, speak. Can you give us some grass to eat?" Perhaps it was because Ren Baqian didn't look ferocious. They mustered up their courage and asked cautiously. This was the first time Ren Baqian had heard such a request, and he couldn't react in time. "What happened?" "Sir, this place is great. We have meat to eat every day, but we really can't digest it. These days, many people have diarrhea. If this continues, I really can't stand it." The few of them were about to cry. Ren Baqian asked again and finally understood. One had to know that in the Yin nation, no one would only eat meat for every meal. Not to mention that they couldn't afford it. Even if they could afford it, they wouldn't do so. Firstly, it was too greasy, and secondly, it was hard to digest. The captive camp was filled with meat soup, fatty meat, and internal organs every day. At first, many people thought it was good that there was meat to eat. However, after 10 days, these people finally realized that eating meat was such a painful thing. One had to know that the Aboriginals were generally at the manual level, and needed to consume large amounts of food to convert essence and blood. Therefore, they had a strong digestive ability. However, these captives didn't have strong stomachs like the Aboriginals, and they didn't have vegetables or tea leaves to clean their stomachs. After 10 days, their eyes were green, and they walked with their heads down every day, hoping to find something green. However, even the weeds in the captive camp had been pulled out by them. Now more than half of the people in the camp had diarrhea every day. Ren Baqian touched his nose. It was really an unexpected request and answer. Even he didn't expect such a thing. Presumably, not many people would have thought of such a thing. While Ren Baqian was in the captive camp, a young lady came to the outskirts of the city. She was in her 20s, and her appearance could be considered beautiful. However, her wide forehead somewhat affected her facial features. However, her pair of eyes that were as bright as the stars were unforgettable. Instead, people would overlook her appearance. The lady was dressed in a white muslin dress, which was obviously in the style of Great Xia. She wore a pair of embroidered cloth shoes, and carried a long sword in a green scabbard on her back. "Where did you come from?" As soon as they saw the woman's appearance and attire, the guards had fierce expressions on their faces, and they drew their swords. "A messenger from the north with a token." The lady immediately flipped her hand and took out a token. The guards checked it before letting her in. That lady was naturally Qing Lian, who had rushed all the way from Great Xia. "Is this Lan City?" Qing Lian walked through the city gate and sized up the surroundings. It is indeed a barren land, Qing Lian thought. From what she could see, the road was deserted, and the buildings on both sides were rather dilapidated. Compared to the bustling capital of Great Xia, it was more than 10 times worse. Among the passers-by, she could actually see many people directly wrapped a piece of animal skin around their waist, which was definitely not seen in Great Xia. However, what followed was endless admiration for the talents of the aboriginals. Any commoner on the street was equivalent to a Great Xia manual expert, and they were even more vigorous. Although earthwheel experts weren't everywhere, they weren't rare along the way. After walking for a while, Qing Lian asked someone for the location of the Black Bamboo Academy and watched 2 street fights before arriving at the academy. Is this the school's closed? Qing Lian walked around outside and saw the tightly shut gate. She also sensed the auras of a few manual and earthwheel experts inside and guessed. Since she was here, she might as well see what fun things there were in this Dayo school. In any case, even if she was caught, she could say that she was here to deliver a letter. Those who didn't know wouldn't be blamed. Moreover, there were only a few people in the courtyard who couldn't even detect her presence. There were only a few people in Dayo who could make her feel apprehensive, and Qi Zixia was the only one in Lan City. Although he couldn't defeat the other Cardinal Heaven experts in Dayo's imperial court, he could still escape. She made up her mind and jumped over the courtyard wall. What she saw made her a little disappointed. It was simply too simple and ordinary. Not to mention comparing it to the Imperial Academy of Great Xia. Any small academy would be 100 times better than this. However, since she was already here, she had to go in and take a look. After scouting out the location of the few people in the academy, Qing Lian first went into a room and saw that it was filled with tables and chairs. She then went to another room and saw a person standing in the corner. She was shocked and asked, "Who is it?" After a few breaths, Qing Lian saw that the person in the corner didn't have any reaction and felt strange. More importantly, there wasn't any aura of a living person on him. She went forward to take a closer look and immediately gasped. She saw that the person was an old man in his 50s or 60s who looked rather robust. However, his lower body actually had 4 legs. This really surprised her. Furthermore, the 4 legs looked like they were attached from the back. Qing Lian thought about it a few times but couldn't figure out the use of 4 legs on a dead person. She went forward to take a closer look, but still couldn't figure out the gist of it. She didn't know what the 4-legged corpse touched, but a sound came from the body and it suddenly opened its eyes. Qing Lian was shocked. In a flash, she landed at the door and stared at the corpse. "Little girl, you'd better leave. If you break it, I'm afraid that fellow will be angry." The voice of an old man sounded behind Qing Lian. Qing Lian's hair stood on end. How could someone be so close to me without me noticing? Was this a human or a ghost? Qing Lian drew her sword, turned around, and in one breath, slashed horizontally behind her. Then the old man behind Qing Lian kicked her groin. Shameless. Qing Lian was furious, and her face was so red that it looked like blood was dripping from it. How could there be such a shameless person in this world? Sure enough, people had their own underlings. That Rinpochian wasn't a good person, and the people in his academy were equally shameless and despicable. Qing Lian used 3 lightning-fast strikes in a row. She didn't linger and disappeared from the courtyard in a flash. After leaving for a long time, Qing Lian was still resentful. She had never met such a shameless person in her life. He was simply too shameless. She would never let him off. And that Rinpochian. Chapter 631. Qing Lian left Black Bamboo Academy and had nowhere to go. She wanted to find Ning Kaichen, but she had no clue and could only wander around Lan City. After a short while, she arrived outside the Imperial Glass Shop. Looking at the clean and bright glass shop that seemed to be covered with a layer of crystals, she became curious and strode in. The glass shop had been open for 3 months, and the initial crowd had died down a lot. Although there were still a lot of people coming in to look at the exquisite glassware, there weren't many people in the shop at the same time, and even fewer people were buying. However, it still brought him tens of thousands of taels of silver in profit every month. At this moment, he was ready to open the glass shop in Tianjing Basin. Although the people there were poor, there were more rich people than in Lan City. Then, after conquering the Yun nation, he would open a glass shop in the Yun nation. He would definitely be able to make a fortune. Qing Lian didn't look at the glassware first. Instead, she looked at the shop assistants with wide foreheads and deep eye sockets. They were obviously not aboriginals. I wonder if these people have seen Ning Kaichen before. Qing Lian thought for a while, and looked at the glassware on the shelves. Beautiful. Qing Lian looked at the glassware on the shelves and immediately fell in love with it. In particular, she liked a tea set. After asking about the price, she found that it was only 800 taels of silver, which made her feel that it was cheap. She had never seen such a crystal tea set before. Although she didn't know what the glass was, it was fine as long as it looked good. After asking about a few more glasses, she found that they were only 150 taels each, which made her want to buy a cart of glasses when she returned. The only problem was that she only had 200 taels of gold with her. Although she still had some banknotes, there was no place in Dayo where she could exchange them. It seemed like she had to get Su Qing to send her some money. If Zhang Junjing was here, he would tell her that the aboriginals only bought glasses for 10 taels each and a glass tea set for 50 taels. For the aboriginals, the price had increased by 15 times. However, at this moment, Qing Lian truly felt that these glassware were being sold cheaply. If these things were in Great Xia, they would be several times more expensive, and there would be no place to buy them. After staying in the glass shop for half a day, Qing Lian left with satisfaction. At least she had gained something from this trip to Dayo. He didn't walk far on the street before he found an even bigger harvest, spices. After eating 2 slices of roasted mutton, Qing Lian's eyes lit up as she touched the bag she carried with her. She made up her mind to send a letter to Su Qing and ask him to send her money. He wanted all the glassware and spices. Qing Lian found a restaurant and waited there until the glass shop and condiment shop closed. Qing Lian followed the shop assistants all the way back to Jing Street. Only then did she find out that this was where the Jing tribe lived. If Ning Kaichen is in Lan City, he is most likely here. Qing Lian walked around Jing Street and saw the small tavern opposite the exit of Jing Street. This is the exit. Let's go inside and ask around. Qing Lian thought for a while and went straight to the tavern. While she was still outside, she could hear the clamor inside. The doors and windows of the tavern were all open. One could see that the tavern was not big, but there were many people inside. It was almost full. There weren't many people from the Jing tribe. Instead, it was filled with aboriginals. A young lady was busy inside, teasing the customers from time to time, causing them to burst into laughter. I have never seen someone as lovely as you. If I were a few years younger, I might have snatched you back. A burly man with a big beard laughed maniacally. You have to ask Sir Ren. I am Sir Ren's woman now. The lady inside spoke gently. Her voice was extremely charming and made one's heart skip a beat. Qing Lian entered the tavern and saw the burly man laughing maniacally. She was shocked, took a few steps back, and stared dumbfoundedly at the burly man. The corpse she saw in the afternoon was actually alive. Moreover, it was emitting the energy waves of a cardinal heaven expert. Her gaze subconsciously drifted to the lower half of the burly man's body. It was actually 2 legs. Where did those legs go? The corpse in the room, the eyes that suddenly opened, the forelegs, and the man at this moment. Strange. It was really too strange. Qing Lian appeared at the door and took a few steps back in shock, attracting the attention of many people in the tavern. Most of them looked at her face, and then at the sword on her back. When did such a person from Great Xia come to Lan City? She was quite good-looking. Soon after, everyone turned around and started to drink. Not long after, people started to leave. They were all here for the lady boss. Now that Tang Jinya was here, the others couldn't beat him, especially the children of the officials. They didn't dare to breathe too loudly and left after drinking. When there were fewer people, Qing Lian went in to find an empty table and sat down. Miss, are you from afar? Ning Kaichen sat opposite Qing Lian and looked at her. Sister, you are so beautiful. Qing Lian exclaimed in admiration. She had to admit that the woman in front of her was the most feminine and seductive she had ever seen. Even though she was just sitting there without speaking, her gaze seemed to speak. Her voice was even more seductive after she spoke. If she were a man, She would definitely snatch this woman home. Unfortunately, she was a woman. This damned vixen in front of her. She hated this kind of vixen the most. She seduced men every day. How shameless could she be? Women didn't need a reason to hate women. She's from Great Xia and just arrived today, Qing Lian said in admiration. It's rare to see people from Great Xia. Ning Kaichen laughed. Sister, you haven't seen people from Great Xia before? I haven't seen them in the past 6 months. What would you like to drink, miss? A pot of the best wine. Ning Kaichen served a pot of fruit wine. It tasted sweet and sour, a little astringent, and the wine was cloudy. In Qing Lian's opinion, it was inferior wine. However, it was already considered good wine here. Ning Kaichen sat opposite Qing Lian. She felt cordial when she met people from Great Xia. Qing Lian was even more eager to do so. She was here to inquire about information. Where are you from, sister? Qing Lian asked. I'm also from Great Xia. Ning Kaichen pursed her lips and smiled. We are fellow countrymen after leaving our homeland. Why is sister here? It's not suitable to stay here for a long time. Qing Lian laughed. One could imagine how difficult it was for such a charming woman to live alone in a place full of mountain people and boorish men. Furthermore, she didn't know any martial arts. At the very least, Qing Lian could sense that her qi and blood were that of an ordinary person, at most a little more abundant. In fact, she would be the same if she left her sword. It was just that there were very few sword masters, and most of them lived in the wilderness, deep in the mountains, and she didn't expect that the charming woman who ran a tavern and teased the aboriginals here was actually a sword master. I have a home, but I can't go back. I have nowhere to go and can only drift like duckweed. Ning Kaichen laughed and didn't look disappointed. I heard someone call you sister just now. Is your surname Ning? Do you know the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy? Qing Lian pretended not to care and asked, but she really wanted to hear the other party's answer. Could it be that the gigolo Qi Zixiao was keeping someone else outside? Did Qi Zixiao know? This was Lan City. Could he really hide it from Qi Zixiao? If Qi Zixiao knew, how could he tolerate it? She was a little curious about what was going on. If there was a chance, she wouldn't mind tricking Rinpochian and taking her revenge. My surname is Ning. As for Sir Run, we can be considered old acquaintances. Qing Lian took note of this and decided to slowly inquire about this matter. She took out a portrait from her bag and asked, Sister, have you seen this person before? Ning Kaichen looked at the person in the portrait and was slightly stunned. She then laughed and said, Yes, I have. Is there something you need from him? Could it be that he did something wrong to you, and you chased him all the way from Great Xia? Qing Lian was overjoyed when she heard this. She thought that she was indeed smart and quick-witted to have found out about this on her first day here. He owes me a debt. I wonder where he is now. After Qing Lian finished speaking, Ning Kaichen shook her head and said, In that case, he must owe you a lot of money. I haven't seen him since the middle of last year, and I don't know where he is now. Perhaps he has left Lan City? Qing Lian was slightly disappointed. It seemed that she still had to stay in Lan City for a while, and she didn't know where to find that guy. She then asked some more questions, but Ning Kaichen didn't reveal that he was Ning Kaichen. She didn't know his identity, but he could detect her identity as a sword master. After all, she carried a sword with her, and he was familiar with spirit swords and could easily tell, based on the feeling that her spirit sword gave him, she was probably more powerful than him. Only a fool would expose himself in such a situation. He had to find out why she was looking for him. Sister, how should I address you? Ning Kaichen. Good name. It's similar to the person I'm looking for. Qing Lian was surprised, but she still couldn't connect this charming lady in front of her with the scholar she was looking for. Sister, do you know where to stay nearby? Qing Lian asked again. If you don't mind, I have an empty room here, Ning Kaichen said. Chapter 632. Rinpochian met Qing Lian the next day. He was giving a lesson to the new students when Shihu came in to report. Sir, someone is looking for you. It's a woman from Great Xia, and she looks pretty. Someone from Great Xia? Looking for me? Renbaqian thought for a while and asked, "Did she tell me why she's here? The person from Great Xia looking for him should be sent by Su Qing." "She said that she has some news to inform you," Shihu replied. Renbaqian looked at the time. The next lesson was about to start and said, "Find a place to let her wait for a while." After a while, Shihu brought Qing Lian to the courtyard, pointed at her feet, and said, "Wait here." He then stood aside and scanned Qing Lian's body from head to toe. Qing Lian's eyes twitched a few times. At least find a room with a chair and tea, but he actually made her wait in the courtyard? Also, this damned guy next to her looked as if he wanted to strip her naked. Coupled with that shameless old thief from yesterday, Qing Lian was sure that everyone in the academy was shameless. She had seen two people like this, which showed the atmosphere in the academy. As the saying went, "Follow the example of your superiors." What kind of person could Renbaqian be? In addition, he actually made her wait in the courtyard under the sun, which made Qing Lian even more dissatisfied. Especially as time passed, this resentment continued to intensify. But soon, her attention was attracted by a clear voice coming from the classroom. Energy will not disappear out of thin air, nor will it be produced out of thin air. It will only transform from one form to another, or transfer from one object to another. In the process of transformation and transfer, the total amount of energy remains the same. Let me give you the simplest example. Eating is absorbing the energy in food and transforming it into essence blood. During a fight, essence blood will be consumed, so after a fight, one has to eat food to replenish the energy in the body. Teacher, the energy obtained from eating food is obviously not as much as the energy from the food itself. For example, the sharp-toothed tiger can reach the Kismet heaven level. If a four-way heaven person eats a Kismet heaven animal, he won't be able to reach the Kismet heaven level. Qing Lian was very interested in the conversation in the classroom. She subconsciously took a few steps forward to listen more clearly. That's because the energy will dissipate. When an animal died, its body could no longer be controlled, and the energy contained in its body would begin to dissipate. Especially the energy contained in blood essence, which dissipated extremely quickly. After that, this energy would return to the world and drift in the air, and be absorbed by people, animals, or plants. It was just like how crops grew exceptionally well after a rotting corpse was buried underground. The energy in the cells would dissipate more slowly. This was because the cells would not die immediately. Instead, they would die in batches over time. While the cells were still alive, the energy would not immediately dissipate. However, it also consumed energy to maintain the survival of these cells. Therefore, as time passed, the energy in the cells would gradually decrease. Everything in the world is made up of energy. Every cell in those corpses is also made up of energy. This is why we can still replenish our energy by eating animal corpses. Teacher, your words are too disgusting. Tong Wan immediately protested. Although it was true that eating meat was eating animal corpses, it still made them feel a little weird. The energy dissipation that Renbaqian was talking about was the research result of the Messier 87 department's laboratory. After obtaining the corpses of experts that Renbaqian took away, the laboratory's research on the energy contained in the human body progressed very quickly. The research results were just right for this lecture. Another point is that we are also consuming energy all the time to maintain our own survival. At the same time, every movement we make consumes energy, even the simplest breathing. Renbaqian then used the steam engine and swing that they were researching as examples to illustrate the transformation and transmission of energy, as well as the effects it would be affected. Qing Lian, who was outside, was a little absent-minded. She was shocked by what Renbaqian was talking about. The content of Renbaqian's lecture reminded her of the Sword Master and the Spirit Sword. The Sword Master used his lifespan to support the Spirit Sword. The more powerful the Spirit Sword and the more times it was used, the faster the Sword Master's lifespan would decrease. Using precious herbs and minerals to nourish the sword could reduce the speed at which the Sword Master's lifespan decreased. Speaking of which, there was a certain similarity with the conservation of energy that Renbaqian had mentioned. Although these things had long been recorded by various seniors, no one had ever explained them like Renbaqian did. His school didn't lecture on the classics and history of Great Xia Academy, the art of war, or the way of governing a country. Instead, it was explaining the fundamentals of this world. Regardless of whether it was right or wrong, the things that he talked about were shocking enough. Putting aside Renbaqian's character, he is indeed capable. What Su Qing said before was right. Qing Lian thought to herself as she continued to listen to what Renbaqian said. Renbaqian continued to talk about internal mechanics. Although she couldn't understand it, she still tried her best to memorize it. Renbaqian only saw her after the morning class was over. However, she wasn't as anxious as she was at the beginning. Instead, she wanted to listen as much as possible. When Renbaqian came out of the classroom, he saw a girl in a gauze dress standing in the courtyard. Not far away, Shi Qing was standing guard at the side as if he was looking at a criminal. He waved at the two of them, turned around, and entered the office. In less than 2 minutes, Qing Lian was brought in. Qing Lian carefully sized up the person sitting in the room. This was the famous gigolo, Qi Zixiao's lover, the poison warrior who killed tens of thousands of people in Great Xia and destroyed the entire 9 pavilions. There was also the principal who had just given a lecture that surprised her. Compared to the aboriginals, he was still skinny, but compared to the Great Xia people, he was already very strong. His face was angular, and he wore a silver and blue robe with cloud patterns. He didn't look like the gigolo that she had imagined. She then swept her gaze to the corner of the room. Sure enough, the corpse that she saw yesterday was no longer there. Thinking about what she saw at the wine shop last night, Qing Lian felt that there was definitely something wrong. However, she was more interested in Renbaqian now. While Qing Lian was sizing him up, Renbaqian was also sizing her up. Her appearance wasn't important. The most important thing was her pair of eyes, which were attractive and unforgettable. Take a seat. How should I address you? Renbaqian asked after sizing her up. Qing Lian. Qing Lian replied casually. What kind of news are you going to send me? Qing Lian retracted her gaze from the corner of the room, took out a letter from her bosom, and placed it on the table. The Crown Prince of Great Xia has ascended to the throne, and is currently transferring troops to Tiesua Pass. Su Qing hopes that you can defeat this batch of Great Xia soldiers as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you drag on for too long, there will be many variables when the new troops finish their training. Renbaqian picked up the letter on the table, opened it, and read it carefully before saying, "Thank you for sending this letter. If you are not in a hurry, you can tour around Lan City for a few days." After finishing her sentence, Qing Lian calculated in her mind and said, "I unintentionally overheard Principal Ren's lecture just now. Please forgive me." "It's all right. Lectures are meant for people to listen to," Renbaqian replied indifferently. Qing Lian had an idea and said, "I have an abrupt request. I will be staying in Lan City for a few days. I wonder if I can listen to a lecture at Black Bamboo Academy? I am willing to exchange treasures for it." Before she came, she wanted to ask Renbaqian if he had any news about Ning Kaichen. However, her mind was currently focused on what Renbaqian was talking about. As for Ning Kaichen, it would be best if she could meet him, but it didn't matter if she didn't. Instead, what the person in front of her was talking about was more important. She knew that this request was too abrupt. Even an ordinary private school in Great Xia wouldn't allow anyone to listen to a lecture. Moreover, the things that the other party was talking about were obviously very important. They were far from what those private schools and academies were talking about. It was impossible for the other party to teach her so easily. More importantly, the other party wasn't an ordinary person or an ordinary official. Ordinary things might not be able to move him. However, no matter what, she wanted to give it a try. Oh, Renbaqian had a faint smile on his face. If the other party wanted to listen to his lecture for a few days, he didn't mind. In any case, the things that he was talking about were systematic. Even though a part of it was useful, it wouldn't be of much use. He didn't expect the other party to eagerly send him treasures. In that case, he had no reason to reject her. Chapter 633. Renbaqian had a spurious smile on his face. It was really surprising that someone would take the initiative to give him a gift. However, this spurious smile had a different meaning in Qing Lian's eyes. She thought that Rinpochian was concealing his identity, and felt that she didn't have anything that could catch his eye. Originally, Qing Lian was only prepared to take out some precious herbs. Almost every sword master had some precious herbs that they obtained by chance, but weren't suitable for themselves to exchange with others. Naturally, she had some. However, after thinking about Rinpochian's identity and the fact that Dayo controlled the 60,000 mountains, these herbs weren't that valuable. If she was rejected by him, it would be much more troublesome for her to ask again. Although she had only heard a few words from the outside, it made her feel that the sentence, "Energy will not disappear out of thin air, nor will it be produced out of thin air. It will only transform from one form to another, or transfer from one object to another. In the process of transformation and transfer, the total amount of energy remains the same." Hearing this sentence made this trip worthwhile. There were many cultivation techniques in this world, but only a few were useful to sword masters. However, this sentence of his pointed to the root of the problem, and allowed her to understand a lot of things from this sentence. She was also very interested in the other things that Rinpochian was talking about. After thinking for a while, she gritted her teeth and said, "I have an ancient scroll. The origin of this technique is unreliable. I only know that it was passed down a long time ago. There are 3 scrolls in total. The first one is the method of cultivation, the second one is the method of nourishing the mind, and the third one is the method of martial arts. The first scroll is the foundation of cultivation, and the second scroll is the method of nourishing the mind to strengthen the spirit. Only when the spirit is strong enough can it be possible to open up the sky and earth and the earth." Open up the sky and earth and the earth and the earth. Rinpochian thought for a while, and didn't seem to have heard of this term. "You don't know? How can you not know?" Unexpectedly, Qing Lian was extremely surprised to see Rinpochian's reaction. She was even more surprised than when she heard his lecture in the courtyard. How could someone who could point to the root of the problem not know about opening up the sky and earth and the earth and the earth? Rinpochian spread his hands. Why should he know? Qing Lian looked at him as if she was looking at a monster for a long time. She rolled her eyes a few times, and there were a few times when she wanted to say that she would use a shueka as her tuition fee. However, she had already mentioned the ancient scroll of methods. If she were to change her words now, she would be fooling a fool. He sighed in his heart. He didn't know if it was worth it to use the ancient scroll of 10,000 methods to listen to this lecture. Fortunately, although this thing was expensive, it was not very useful to him. Moreover, he had seen it many times, so it did not matter if he gave it away. Those who could use this thing were all martial artists, but the things that he wanted, ordinary martial artists would not be able to take them out. Therefore, it could only be used as a bargaining chip. Perhaps in the future, he could exchange it for something else, or perhaps he could hold it in his hand for the rest of his life. Since that was the case, he might as well make the exchange now. As long as the other party's words were of some value to him, then it would be worth it. Thinking of this, he felt much more at ease. A martial artist's cultivation is actually a process of perfecting themselves. The man-will level is only the foundation, while the earth-will level is to train the physical body. It is to train the body from top to bottom without any obstacles, and one can even use the physical body to sense the earth. On the other hand, the spirit-will level is the cultivation of the spirit, tempering the spirit, and reaching the stage where the spirit can sense the heaven and earth. However, at this moment, the spirit is the spirit, and the physical body is the physical body. The heaven in the heaven and earth refers to the spirit, and the earth refers to the physical body. Opening the heaven and earth refers to breaking through the membrane between the spirit and the physical body, condensing the spirit and the physical body into one, and finally reaching the stage where one can form the heaven and earth. Qing Lian explained. And the method of nourishing the spirit in the ancient scroll of 10,000 methods has the effect of condensing and strengthening the spirit. It is a pity that there is no first volume. If there is, one can practice it at the earth-will level. When one reaches the earth embryo realm, one can directly cross the path to heaven and attain the spirit-will level. But even so, This ancient scroll is much more valuable than most of the methods of nourishing the spirit. Qing Lian felt that it was a pity. If there was the first volume, the value of this ancient scroll would increase by 10 or even 100 times. Renbaqian was deep in thought. It seemed that opening the heaven and earth was the realm above the spirit. This was something that he had never known. As for this ancient scroll, it could be used as a reference in the future. As for whether this ancient scroll could be used or not, it was still far from him. However, there were only 2 manuals related to the spirit in Qingxin Palace Hall, which showed how rare this type of martial arts was. Moreover, these 2 manuals were used to condense heaven-grade weapons. Not only could the other party condense heaven-grade weapons, but it also had the effect of strengthening the spirit. It was indeed valuable. The ancient scroll is in Great Xia. I will get someone to deliver it. It will arrive in about half a month, Qing Lian said. The ancient scroll doesn't matter. I see that you are wholeheartedly seeking knowledge, and your heart is commendable. You can come to class tomorrow. Renbaqian nodded. Then with a solemn face he said, knowledge knows no boundaries. This was to prevent the other party from thinking that he allowed her to attend class because of the ancient scroll. After all, he was a teacher in a mountainous area. How could he be so unscrupulous? However, he felt that it was a little strange. A person who could take out such an ancient scroll was definitely not an ordinary person, let alone a messenger. This woman's identity was probably not ordinary. He didn't know why she came to Lan City, and what her purpose was. Renbaqian's words, knowledge knows no boundaries, surprised Qing Lian. To be able to say such words, his breadth of mind was far beyond that of an ordinary person. He was much stronger than those scholars that she had met before. It seems that I have misunderstood him in the past. This person isn't as unbearable as I thought, Qing Lian thought to herself. She had a much better impression of this legendary gigolo. Qing Lian cupped her fists at Renbaqian and said, Thank you, Principal Ren. I will take my leave first. After Qing Lian left, Renbaqian sat for a while before returning to the palace. The Empress was using a pair of scissors to cut candies from a tree. The candies that were hung up yesterday were already 1/5 gone. They were scattered all over the ground, but the Empress didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. Upon hearing Renbaqian's footsteps, the Empress turned her head and asked, Where is the wine pool that you promised me? The officials have already discussed the street lamps. If I make another wine pool, I'm afraid that they will impeach me. Renbaqian spread his hands. Impeach? What impeach? Who would dare to impeach me? The Empress raised her eyebrows and sneered. Tomorrow I will ask around and brew some fruit wine for your majesty. Renbaqian replied. Okay. The Empress's gloomy face immediately cleared up. Her eyebrows relaxed, and her eyes were full of admiration. Renbaqian then told the Empress about what happened just now, but she didn't seem to care at all. I can't be bothered with these things. If there aren't any suitable martial arts manuals, I will bring you to rob them. From the Empress's point of view, problems that could be solved by force were never a problem. Your Majesty, as the monarch of a nation, you can't always rob. It will damage your reputation. Renbaqian said. You don't know how to appreciate my kindness. The Empress snorted. She was being kind, but the person in front of her actually didn't appreciate it. Her face immediately turned cold. It should be borrowing. How can you say that I'm robbing? Renbaqian changed the topic. He then mimicked the Empress's voice and said, I'm here to rob. Hand over all the gold, jewelry, and secret manuals. Hand over all the gold, jewelry, and secret manuals for me to take back and appreciate. Which one do you think is more suitable, Your Majesty? Renbaqian asked. The surrounding guards immediately looked at Renbaqian with admiration. Principal Ren was indeed Principal Ren. Let's not talk about which one is more suitable first. Your voice is very annoying. The Empress picked up Renbaqian with one hand and pretended to throw him. Your Majesty, these are all minor details. That's not the point. Renbaqian felt that something was wrong and quickly explained. What I pay attention to are the minor details. The Empress didn't listen to his explanation at all, and directly threw him onto the candy tree like a sandbag. After a piece of candy fell, the Empress immediately beamed with joy. Chapter 634. That afternoon, Renbaqian finally received some good news. The rubber that Tang Xinye had asked someone to find had arrived. Hearing this news, he immediately led his men out of the palace and headed for the Ministry of Works. Upon arriving at the Ministry of Works, Renbaqian saw a few large rubber blocks that looked like aggregates packed in bags. There were white, light yellow, and brown colors. He touched it with his hand and found that it was quite elastic. However, he still had to bring it back to Earth and find someone to test if it could meet his requirements. Subsequently, Renbaqian left the Ministry of Works with a long list of materials that needed to be found, including sulfur, black kerosene, also known as petroleum, permanent magnets, aluminium nickel cobalt, samarium cobalt, neodymium iron boron, tungsten, tin aluminum, and other mineral deposits. There were hundreds of them, and the characteristics of each type and the environment in which they were likely to appear were written behind them. It could be said that everything on this list was needed for the development of science and technology. As long as these things were found, most of the problems encountered in the development process could be solved. Just like sulfur, it could be used to make gunpowder, and it could also be used to make sulfuric acid. The function of gunpowder was needless to say, and sulfuric acid could be used to make explosives, pigments, fertilizers, batteries, and so on. It could be said that the future development of sulfuric acid was inevitable. There was no need to explain the role of oil either. Even a child on Earth knew the role of oil. Permanent magnets were needed to make generators. Tungsten could be used to make filament, high-speed steel, etc. Renbaqian only hoped to find as many species as possible, so that there would be fewer constraints in the future. If they really lacked it, they could only bring it from Earth and wait for this world's chemistry to develop before slowly looking for a substitute. Renbaqian happily took out the list, but Tang Xinye was shocked when he saw it. So many? How? Try your best. In the future, no matter what special items you find, whether they are useful or not, bring them back for me to take a look. Who knows, there might be something I need. Remember to label the source of each item. In addition, the ones underlined on this piece of paper were the most important ones to look for. There was a high possibility that permanent magnets existed in Tianjing Basin. One could go there with a sword and see where the suction was the strongest. As for sulfur, it should be easy to find where there are volcanoes. Maybe we can find some other things as well. This isn't a good job. Tang Xinye smacked his lips. How much manpower and resources would it take to find so many things? Moreover, the introductions of many things seemed to be the same, so there was no way to find them. They are all essential things, so you must find them. If you lack money or manpower, you can report to Her Majesty, and she will agree, Renbaqian said. Tang Xinye glanced at Renbaqian and said, Only Her Majesty supports you. Although some of the things you've created are quite useful, there are still too many of them. Do you remember the street lamps in the palace, the one that you have been complaining about? As long as we can find the tungsten and sulfur, as well as a large amount of copper and rubber, we can mass produce them, just like the glass in the glass shop. When the time comes, the whole of Lan City will be covered and Lan City will become a city that never sleeps. If these things are manufactured and sold, would the Ministry of Works still be short of money? Renbaqian bewitched. As long as we find these things, Sir Tong will have made a great contribution to Dayo. Leave this to me. I will find it for you even if I have to risk my life. Upon hearing this, Tang Xinye immediately patted his chest as a guarantee. His fist, which was as big as a casserole, pounded on his chest like a drum. Thank you, Sir Tong. Renbaqian cupped his hands with a smile and left with the bags of rubber. At night, Renbaqian and the Empress appeared in Renbaqian's bedroom. The Empress glanced around and saw a layer of dust on the floor as well as a few rows of footprints. The Empress believed that as long as she took a step out, there would definitely be an additional footprint. Or rather, there would already be 2 additional footprints where she was standing. The Empress was somewhat speechless. How could it be so dirty? More importantly, she came barefooted. Ah! Your Majesty, what are you doing? Hey, Renbaqian exclaimed. Be obedient and lie down. The Empress poked Rinpoche's waist, and half of his body immediately went numb. Then she placed him on the floor, forming a large human-shaped carpet. She then gently leaped and landed on Rinpoche's stomach. Ow ow. Rinpoche immediately cried out. The Empress rubbed her feet on Rinpoche's stomach twice before saying, "Why is it so dirty?" The last time I came back, the cleaner resigned and went back to his hometown to recuperate. After all, every time I came here, I saw that bunch of idiots playing with barbells that weighed hundreds of kilograms, drinking, playing finger-guessing games, slapping people, and pasting people to the wall. It was too stressful to see such scenes every time. Previously, they wanted to resign several times, and I gave them a raise. In the end, the last time I came, I saw someone flying past me and pasting him to the wall while I was cleaning. I was so shocked that I fell off the ladder, broke one of my arms, and had to go home to recuperate. Rinpoche was speechless when he received this news. Unfortunately, he was about to leave and didn't have time to find a cleaner. He couldn't let the winged cavalry warriors clean the place. By the time they were done cleaning, his bedroom would be in ruins. Then this happened when he came back. Weak humans, the Empress commented after thinking about it. Your Majesty, you are also a human. Rinpoche reminded her. I'm an aboriginal. The Empress didn't seem to mind at all. Your Majesty, my stomach hurts. Rinpoche groaned. The Empress was obviously only about 50 kilograms, so why did she step on him so hard? You are too weak. Go back and practice more martial arts. The Empress moved her feet, stepped on Rinpoche's chest, reached out, and opened the door. At this moment, Rinpoche suddenly reached out and scratched the sole of the Empress's foot. Ah! The Empress exclaimed as she felt the itch in her heart. She exerted force with her foot, and landed outside the room in a flash. She turned around and glared at Rinpoche. Ah! Rinpoche spat out a mouthful of blood. The Empress's kick just now made him feel like his internal organs were about to explode. Your Majesty, I'm afraid I can't make it. Rinpoche looked like he wanted to cry, but had no tears. My internal organs are all shattered. The Empress looked doubtful. Was her kick that powerful? However, Rinpoche was still spitting out mouthfuls of blood. Zixiao, you didn't mean it, so I won't blame you. It's just that before I die, can you fulfill a wish of mine? Rinpoche put on a gentle expression as blood dripped from the corner of his mouth. It was like a scene out of a kimchi drama. The Empress's heart skipped a beat. Scenes from the TV series that she had watched immediately flashed in her mind. She couldn't tell what kind of feeling she had, but it felt like something was being torn apart. Then, she carefully sensed Rinpoche's aura. The Empress stepped forward and kicked Rinpoche out of the window. No! The Empress said angrily. This damned fellow lied to her again. Who asked you to pretend to be seriously injured? I'll seriously injure you. Your Majesty, this isn't right. Rinpoche was outside the window, experiencing the thrill of free fall. Bang! Lady Boss? What's wrong with you? Chapter 635. Your Majesty. Rinpoche was on crutches, and his leg was in a cast. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He was really crippled this time. When he fell, his leg hit the barbell that those idiots used to exercise, and it cracked. It was a tragedy. It was such a huge piece of plowed land, so it was fine to fall anywhere. Even an ordinary person wouldn't die from the height of the second floor, let alone Rinpoche, who was an intermediate man-wheel expert. But it was such a coincidence that his leg hit the barbell. He was taken away by an ambulance and sent to the hospital to be put in a cast. The Empress felt a little soft-hearted when she saw his miserable appearance, but her reputation was the most important thing in this world. She didn't show any signs of soft-heartedness. Humph. Serves you right. Your Majesty, don't you feel a little heartache? The Empress thought about it seriously. It's more heartache than stepping on an ant. Rinpoche said. Your Majesty, please don't say any more. My heart is cold. The Empress rolled her eyes, placed a hand on his chest, and asked in a soft voice, Can you feel the heat of my palm? It was very warm, and it was right in front of his heart. He felt as if he could feel the Empress's heartbeat through the hand that was pressing on his chest. My clothes are too thick, so I can't feel it. Wait until I take them off. Rinpoche began to pull up his t-shirt with one hand. The Empress raised her eyebrows, withdrew her hand, and kicked Rinpoche's uninjured leg. Rinpoche almost knelt down. Sure enough, teasing an Empress who was as strong as a transformer was risking his life. However, Rinpoche was enjoying it. Rinpoche originally wanted to go to the laboratory, but unfortunately, he was crippled. He could only ask Shenfeng to fetch some rubber from him, and then send the plan back. As time went by, the results from the laboratory increased. At least for martial arts below the manual level, the Messier 87 department used the supercomputer to test countless possibilities, and the final 9th set of introductory cultivation could even reach the level of a top-notch martial art. However, after the manual level, the progress was still slow due to the small number of samples. It was only a matter of time. Another important result was that the laboratory had made great progress in the field of brainwave reception through the study of the sword that could lengthen and shorten, as well as bend and extend as needed. With the development of this technology, perhaps one day, humans would be able to complete all tasks by thinking. For example, smart homes, weapon control, and all objects with receivers could be controlled by thinking. As long as such thoughts were in one's mind, one would be able to complete tasks that originally required fingers or voice. Although this was still very far away, Rinpoche was looking forward to the future. After staying on Earth for 2.5 days, Rinpoche brought the tested rubber and the Empress back to Dayo. The first thing he did was to break up the plaster and apply a layer of ointment on his legs. After that, he walked to the academy on crutches. As soon as he entered the school, he saw a bored lady standing in the courtyard. She looked dissatisfied when she saw him. She was dissatisfied that he had promised her that she could attend the class, but she didn't. Then, she looked at Rinpoche's legs and pursed her lips. Her bright eyes were filled with schadenfreude as she asked, "Did he encounter domestic violence?" "You even know about domestic violence?" Rinpoche was a little surprised. He didn't expect such a modern term to come out of her mouth. "Humph, don't look down on me. I also went to a girls' school." Qing Lian's face immediately darkened. Great Xia actually has the term domestic violence. Rinpoche immediately changed his way of saying it. "If you know, why can't others know?" Qing Lian asked. Rinpoche spread his hands, walked toward the classroom with his walking stick, and said, "Follow me. By the way, you have a dirty old man here. What does he do? He doesn't seem like an ordinary person." Qing Lian rolled her eyes and asked. The more she thought about how Li Fu suddenly appeared behind her that day, the more she felt that it was strange. How could she be bullied from behind without realizing it? Rinpoche laughed in his heart when he heard this. After tricking Li Fu into coming to Lan City for so long, he finally had a chance to show off. Casually he said, "How did you meet him? He's sweeping the floor." Other than Rinpoche, which other school in the world had the world's #1 expert sweeping the floor? Just thinking about it made him feel that he was being too pretentious. If word got out, it would scare half the martial artists in the world to death. Sweeping the floor? Impossible? Qing Lian's reaction was the same as what Rinpoche had expected. There are a lot of things that are impossible. Rinpoche continued to act nonchalantly and acted as if he didn't care. Qing Lian was suspicious. Could it be that she was too focused that day and didn't notice that he was behind her? Was he actually not the exceptional expert that she thought he was? However, the speed and strength of his kick couldn't be faked. How could such a person be sweeping the floor here? As she thought about it, Qing Lian slowed down and fell behind Rinpoche. Rinpoche entered the classroom and coughed. The originally noisy classroom immediately quietened down. "From today onwards, there will be an auditing student who will be learning with you," Rinpoche said and then called out, "Come in." "Someone from Great Xia?" Qing Lian had just entered the classroom when there was an uproar. Tong Lan flipped over and landed on the table. It was as if she would pounce on them in the next second. "Be quiet and sit down, especially you. What do you look like now? A female monkey?" Rinpoche reprimanded. "He's someone from Great Xia." Tonglan pointed at Qing Lian and shouted, "In the future, many of you will become officials. Don't treat the things that you will face with a black and white mindset. Only children will do that. Just like Great Xia, even though they are enemies now, they aren't a monolithic entity. There are enemies and some who aren't enemies. What we need to do is to turn our enemies into dead people, and then turn those who aren't enemies into enemies instead of killing everyone indiscriminately." Ren Baqian reasoned with the students calmly. Tonglan, Shirgan, Qing Lian. Everyone's faces were filled with shock and awe. Turning those who weren't enemies into enemies, and then turning them into dead people? What was the difference between this and indiscriminately killing everyone with a rod? "Introduce yourself," Ren Baqian said to Qing Lian with satisfaction when he saw that everyone had quietened down. Qing Lian really wanted to ask Ren Baqian if what he said was right. However, she swallowed her words and said, "I'm Qing Lian. I'm not your enemy." Chapter 636. On the first day of class, Qing Lian discovered a serious problem. She couldn't understand Ren Baqian's lecture at all. At first, when Ren Baqian said that today's topic was electricity, she was full of anticipation, and even a little surprised. No matter when lightning was the most powerful force that was most difficult for humans to control. More importantly, the name of her sword was Thunderclap. It wasn't that the sword was as fast as lightning, but that this sword was really related to lightning. Therefore, when Qing Lian heard that Ren Baqian was going to teach her about electricity, she was pleasantly surprised. She didn't expect to hear such an important thing on the first day. Then, her expectant gaze gradually froze. She couldn't understand what they were talking about electrons, atoms, molecules, and electric charges at all. Ren Baqian also gave everyone silk and glass rods for the experiment. She didn't understand at all, and could only watch the students from the back. Or rather, her pride didn't allow her to do things that looked childish like those kids. She was still very curious about what Ren Baqian was talking about. What made her depressed was that Ren Baqian gave her a book, but she couldn't understand it at all. This made her a little mad. The words in the book were like a heavenly book. She spent a lot of effort to decipher a few words, and she didn't know if those words had the same meaning as the words of Great Xia. During the second lesson, her attention shifted to the four-legged man who appeared in the classroom. This was because she had seen this man outside. He had 2 legs and was very powerful. However, the man in the classroom didn't have any vitality and was like a corpse. Although he could move and speak, his voice always sounded stiff and extremely weird. It was as if he was prepared to say something. Aren't they the same person? Qing Lian quickly realized this problem. No matter how she thought about it, they weren't the same person. After school, she couldn't help but look for Ren Baqian and said, "Principal Ren, I don't understand these words." Qing Lian was very reluctant to say this because it made her feel like she was illiterate. However, this was the truth. "Oh, you should study with the new students. They will teach you how to read." Ren Baqian smiled. Qing Lian's expression suddenly changed. The new students were all older children. Not to mention whether she was willing to learn from them. How long would she have to stay in Lan City? Is there any other way? "This is for you." Ren Baqian took out a stack of paper from the table. On the paper were the words and simplified Chinese characters of this world that he had marked before. It was equivalent to a dictionary. "Remember to return it to me when you're done." "Thank you." Qing Lian was delighted when she saw the content on the topmost piece of paper. With this, it would be much more convenient. "You can ask if you don't know," Ren Baqian replied. Qing Lian nodded. The problem now was that she didn't know anything. It seemed like she could only go back and figure out the words first. After bidding farewell to Ren Baqian, Qing Lian left the academy. As she walked past the imperial city, she took a deep look in its direction. The 5th most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao, was inside. She wondered what kind of woman she was. Wrong, she was the 4th most powerful expert in the world. However, not many people knew about Teng Yu's death. Most people still thought that she was the 5th most powerful expert in the world. As a result, Li Yuanzhu and Qi Zixiao were ranked 3rd and 4th in the world. The two of them were about the same age. Li Yuanzhu was a few years older, but she could already be considered a heaven's pride. In terms of strength, Qi Zixiao should be weaker than Li Yuanzhu. However, in a few more years, Qi Zixiao would probably not be weaker than the current Li Yuanzhu. Ren Baqian was really envious of their talents. As a sword master, she didn't have the opportunity to cultivate, and her lifespan was much shorter than theirs. She would probably age like those ordinary people after 10 or 20 years, while they would still be able to maintain their current appearance. At the thought of this, Qing Lian felt a little regretful and sad. When she was young, she also had the dream of becoming an expert in the world. Although her current strength wasn't considered weak, she was unfortunately a sword master. Just as she was feeling emotional, she suddenly heard an ear-piercing sound coming from the side. The thunder behind her also trembled as if it was warning her. Qing Lian dodged it, and a stone smashed into the flagstone beside her, smashing it into pieces. A little girl who was about 10 years old, dressed in a white silk robe, stood on top of the wall and looked at her with a fierce expression. "Hey, great Xia citizen!" Tong Lan shouted from the top of the wall. Her voice was as clear as a silver bell. Didn't your parents teach you to be polite?" Qing Lian said unhappily. "Grandfather has always told me to kill anyone from Great Xia first. Only dead Great Xia people are good people." Tong Lan leaped down from the wall and walked to Qing Lian in a few steps. "Draw a circle." Tong Lan leaned forward, and the tip of her nose was almost in front of Qing Lian's chest. When she saw the mountain range on Qing Lian's chest, Tong Lan felt even more disgusted with this woman. Draw a circle. If you win, I won't find trouble with you in the future. If you lose, don't let me see you again." Tong Lan stared at the mountain range in front of her, and said word by word. "You are cross-eyed," Qing Lian suddenly said. Tong Lan's face turned bright red, and she retreated a few meters away in a flash. "Don't say such useless things. If you lose, don't ever appear in front of me again." Tong Lan put her hands on her waist and stared at Qing Lian with a red face. "You were really cross-eyed just now. Also, I said before that we are not enemies," Qing Lian said. In any case, only dead Great Xia people are good people. Next is Great Xia people who are out of sight." Tong Lan raised her small face slightly. "What exactly do you want?" "I said before that we will draw a circle and have a competition. Whoever is knocked out of the circle first will lose." Qing Lian looked at the tiny child in front of her, and felt somewhat helpless. These aboriginals all had a bad temper. She wasn't afraid of the other party. No matter how she looked, the other party was only about 10 years old. Furthermore, she could feel that the other party was weaker than her. However, why did she have to fight with the other party? One had to know that every time a sword master uses a spirit sword, he consumes his lifespan. If I don't agree, I'm afraid that the other party will always find trouble with me in the future. That would be a headache for me. This bet isn't very fair to me. The price I have to pay is much higher," Qing Lian said. "This is Dayo, not Great Xia. What kind of fairness do you want? However, I won't bully you." "Say it." Tong Lan put her hands on her waist and told the other party whose territory this was. Following which, her tone changed. "If I lose, I won't appear in front of you again. If you lose, you have to respectfully address me as sister whenever you see me. If anyone finds trouble with me, you have to be responsible for settling them. Do you think I'm a fool? If you return to Great Xia, do you think I have to go there to protect you?" Tong Lan said with disdain. "Only in Lan City. Or I can narrow it down to only the academy. As long as someone from the academy finds trouble with me, you have to be responsible for settling them," Qing Lian said. Even though she had only stayed at the academy for a day, she could tell that this girl was different from the others. Not only was she the youngest, but many people seemed to be afraid of her. In this way, as long as I win against this little girl, I won't have to worry about anyone finding trouble with me anymore. This will also prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. Shirgan, do you think Tong Lan can win?" A few young men and women squatted in the corner and watched the scene on the street. Tong Lan was using the tip of her foot to draw a big circle on the ground. There were only a few people watching from a distance. Fortunately, this was in Beihong district, which was close to the palace. If there was such a popular entertainment in a crowded place, there would probably be a group of people holding nuts and shaved ice waiting there. I don't know. Logically speaking, given little Tonglan's strength, there aren't many people in Great Xia who can defeat her. I don't feel any danger from this woman, but I feel that her aura is a little strange. One of the young men was Shurgan. Shurgan, with the few of us squatting here, will anyone find trouble with us? One of the young men said with a cheeky smile. The few of them were squatting on the top of the wall of the Shur family's residence. They hadn't forgotten the situation after they broke through the Shur family's wall. You can choose to go down there. I'm sure no one will find trouble with you. Shurgan rolled his eyes. The view here is better. That young man looked around and felt that this was the best place to go. Should we inform Yagüe? Someone else asked. By the time Yagüe arrives, the fight will be over. Besides, he's just a person from Great Xia. Someone immediately said with disdain. Forget it, let's stay here and watch. The person who spoke gave up the idea after some thought. Chapter 637. Whoever steps out of the circle first will lose. Let's stick to what we just said. If you lose, don't ever appear in front of me again. Tonglan drew a circle on the ground with the tip of her foot, leaving a palm-thick mark on the slate. Then, she walked to the center of the circle and looked up at Qing Lian. Do you think you will win? If you lose, you have to respectfully call me sister when you see me. Qing Lian smiled as she looked at the tiny child in front of her. In Great Xia, reaching the Manwheel level at this age was considered pretty good. Attaining the Earthwheel level at the age of 20 was considered a rare genius. However, this girl in front of her was only about 10 years old. Yet she had the strength of an intermediate Earthwheel expert. Her talent was indeed terrifying. What was more terrifying was that she wasn't the only girl with such strength. There were a few older Earthwheel experts around, such as the 15 or 16-year-old youngster in the class and the 15 or 16-year-old boy and girl standing not far away. The Aboriginals were really a terrifying race. Even though Qing Lian had absolute confidence in her strength and could escape from those Cardinal Heaven experts, she was still shocked by the cultivation potential of the Aboriginals. The three nations had been using technology to block the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals were so poor, and they lacked food and weapons. However, they were able to defeat Great Xia and the Yun Nation, and the Chun Nation with their 100,000 soldiers last year. If the Aboriginals didn't lack food and weapons and had hundreds of thousands of soldiers, they would be really terrifying. At this moment, she doubted whether Su Qing's decision was right or wrong. However, she quickly laughed at herself. She wasn't a saint, so what did this have to do with her? All she had to do was complete the deal with Su Qing and help him fulfill his wish. Then he would use the power of the entire nation to fulfill her request. As for other matters, what did it have to do with her? She was just a little girl. Hey, can you hurry up? Tonglan raised her eyebrows and shouted after seeing that Qing Lian didn't move for a long time. Qing Lian smiled, took a few steps forward, and walked into the circle. She drew her sword from her back and pointed it diagonally at the ground in front of her. Make your move. Without saying a word, Tonglan stomped on the flagstone and shot toward Qing Lian like a cannonball. While she was in the air, she punched Qing Lian 13 times in a row. Every punch was aimed at Qing Lian's chest, as if she had a grudge against it. With the speed of her punches and the sound of the air being torn apart, no one doubted that as long as they landed a punch, they would be able to pierce through the person in front of them. Naughty girl. When Qing Lian saw Tonglan's actions, the corners of her eyes twitched a few times. A sword screen appeared in front of her and blocked the 13 punches. Such great strength. The two of them had just exchanged blows when Qing Lian's eyes twitched again. This little girl's strength was much greater than she had imagined. Clang, clang, clang. Their fists and swords clashed 13 times. Qing Lian took 3 steps back and barely stopped in the circle. Get out! Tonglan leaped up ferociously and kicked Qing Lian consecutively. However, at the same time, Qing Lian also leaped up and jumped even higher than Tong Lan. In the air, Qing Lian stretched her limbs and flipped over Tong Lan's head. At the same time, a dazzling white sword light slashed toward Tong Lan like a thunderbolt. "Oh no!" The surrounding people immediately exclaimed. They didn't expect that a winner would be decided in just a split second. However, at this moment, Tong Lan twisted a few times in the air and waved her right palm several times. All of the palm strikes landed on the body of the sword and forcefully pushed the sword force to the side. What a powerful little girl. It seems like I have to use more skills. Qing Lian was a little surprised. She originally thought that such a young girl didn't have much combat experience, and that the sword attack just now would have caught her off guard. She didn't expect the other party to react so quickly. "Your Majesty?" Tong Lan's expression changed the moment she landed and looked behind Qing Lian. Tong Lan's voice gave everyone a shock. Why would Her Majesty appear here? They immediately turned their heads to look. Qing Lian's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to turn her head back, but she forcibly stopped herself from twisting her neck. From the corner of her eye, she saw the little girl rushing toward her. This little girl is evil, Qing Lian thought to herself. I almost fell for it. Tong Lan's petite body got close to Qing Lian's body and directly used her shoulder to knock Qing Lian. She used one hand to block Qing Lian's backhand sword and followed up with a kick to the groin. She forced Qing Lian to retreat and continued to attack while saying, "Why must you come to the school? Can't you just leave? You won't understand even if you come. They say that big breasts have no brains. Since your breasts are so big, your brain must be full of gravy. Don't tell me you have taken a fancy to that gigolo? That won't do. Her Majesty will beat you to death. Even if she doesn't beat you to death, she will still skin you alive." Tong Lan suddenly had a look of realization and said seriously, "This little girl deserves to be slapped." The more Qing Lian listened to Tong Lan's words, the angrier she got. This little girl looked pretty good, but her words and actions were really infuriating. She used underhanded tricks one after another and kept muttering trash talk, which was very annoying. Who did Tong Lan learn this from? Shergan and the rest were a little confused when they saw this scene. They didn't know Tong Lan was like this in the past. She actually had so many underhanded tricks and so much trash talk. It definitely wasn't taught by Minister Tong. Shergan said with certainty. Although Minister Tong also liked to bicker with Minister Qin, both of them would fight after a few words, unlike Tong Lan who could fight and talk at the same time. "Do you guys think she looks a little like someone?" Another student said thoughtfully. "She looks a little like Yagüe." The person beside him immediately reacted. "I heard that Tong Lan often goes to the palace to train with Yagüe." Everyone discussed for a while and immediately knew where Tong Lan learned this from. Indeed, Yagüe was the only one with this style. "Where did you buy this pair of shoes?" "I saw my grandfather bring one back the other day. He said it was a gift from a lady in a brothel." "Were you in a brothel too? What were you doing there? Did you see my grandpa there?" Qing Lian was going crazy. Why was this little girl so bad? Her stomach was full of dirty tricks, and there wasn't a single dirty word coming out of her mouth. She might as well use dirty words. Originally, she didn't want to attract attention, so it was better to deal with her with all her might. 9 heavens! Qing Lian forced Tong Lan to retreat with a series of strikes. Then, she pointed her sword to the sky, and it seemed as though something was gathering and twining around the sword. Shergan's facial expression changed immediately. This is bad. Tong Lan's facial expression also changed. She kicked her feet repeatedly, and 2 shoes came out of her feet and flew towards Qing Lian's face. Chapter 638. At this moment, the sword in Qing Lian's hand shone with a greenish-blue radiance, as if there were electric arcs twining around it. Calamity! Qing Lian didn't listen to Tong Lan's trash talk and slashed out with her sword. Before the sword landed, everyone around felt a gust of wind. The girl in the field wasn't holding a sword, but an electric dragon that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Tong Lan gritted her teeth and took out a small dagger from her waist. The blade of the dagger was only the size of her palm, and it was covered with vein patterns that looked like blood vessels. She held the dagger upside down in front of her. Boom! Qing Lian's sword slashed down like a gas explosion. All the flagstones in the field exploded, and Tong Lan was blown away. She flew 70 to 80 meters before crashing heavily on the ground. Tong Lan! A few students immediately dashed toward Tong Lan. A few silhouettes landed around Qing Lian in an instant. 4 young men and women surrounded Qing Lian from 4 corners. Coming to Lan City to flaunt your prowess, do you think Dayo is weak? 6th uncle, bring me my rod. Shirgan sneered, turned his head, and shouted toward the courtyard. Then he turned to the other 3 and said, Are you all new students this year? I can handle this. So powerful, but I also want to try out the experts from Great Xia. A young girl smiled and pulled out a dagger from her waist. It's too embarrassing to fight 4 against 1. You guys fight, I will go and take a look. The other 2 looked at each other, took the initiative to retreat, and headed straight for Tong Lan. Then, an iron rod as thick as a wrist flew out of the courtyard with a whistling sound and stuck diagonally into the ground. Thank you, 6th uncle. Shirgan stepped forward and pulled out the rod with a smile. If you lose, don't call me uncle. A row of heads appeared on the wall of the courtyard, and 5 or 6 people were leaning on the wall and looking out. Come on. You are the worst in the Shi family. One of the burly men laughed loudly, causing another round of laughter. Shirgan's face immediately turned black. After that strike, there were a lot more people on the street. About 40 to 50 people jumped out from various courtyards and surrounded them. Qing Lian felt the aura around her and was secretly shocked. The weakest of these people was actually at the Earth Will level, and there were even 3 Spirit Will experts. Who was that movement just now? Interesting. A heroic voice came from afar. When the last word fell, the person was already in front of them. Everyone turned around and saw that it was Tong Jinya. Interesting. It's this sword, right? Tong Jinya rubbed his chin as he stared at the sword in Qing Lian's hand. The power of the sword just now wasn't enough for him to specially come over to watch, but there was one thing that interested him. It gave off the feeling that it was like a bolt of lightning in the sky. Are you the great Xia man who has been staying at the lady boss's place for the past 2 days? Tong Jinya recognized Qing Lian's identity. The lady boss was naturally referring to Ning Kaichen. Recently, his range of activities had shifted from House Yunyan to the Gui family tavern. However, you guys are quite bold to actually fight in front of the imperial palace. Tong Jinya looked at Qing Lian, then looked at Shirgan, who was holding a rod, and the young girl who was holding a short knife. It wasn't you two? Who is it? Tong Jinya immediately discovered that there were no signs of a fight between the 2 of them. He then looked at the people around him and had a bad premonition. Grandpa! In the distance, Tong Lan looked gloomy after being helped up. She didn't expect this guy to be so powerful, and she didn't feel it at all. Qing Lian's heart skipped a beat. This was like hitting the young, and the old came. This was going to be troublesome. Little Lan Lan? Tong Jinya saw that there were bloodstains on the corner of Tong Lan's mouth and lapel, and that there were many wounds on her body. He immediately flew into a rage. He had no hair, and his beard was all standing up. A pair of eyes that were as sharp as steel knives swept across Qing Lian, causing her to subconsciously hold her sword in front of her chest. The surrounding students were also forced to retreat step by step due to his imposing manner. Even Shirgan and the young girl couldn't stand still, and retreated to the corner of the wall. However, Shirgan's vision immediately turned black as if a wall had appeared in front of him. 6 burly men stood in front of him and watched the scene with folded arms. You came to Lan City to beat up my granddaughter, hee. Tong Jinya sneered. Do you think I should hang you on the wall to dry, or hang you on the wall after drying? Qing Lian frowned, glanced around, and thought to herself, why isn't Rinpochian here yet? I'm afraid that only Rinpochian will be able to explain himself today. Sir Tong, Her Majesty wants all of you to have an audience with her. At this moment, a woman in full armor appeared in the middle of the scene. Exionja, wait for me to hang this little girl on the wall before following you to see Her Majesty, Tong Jingya said. Her Majesty wants all of you to have an audience with her. Exionja repeated. Grandpa, I was the one who asked her to draw the circle. It has nothing to do with you, Tong Lan said as she was supported by someone. You are my granddaughter. Tong Jingye glared at her. Why are you getting involved in the affairs of women? Tong Lan said disdainfully. Tong Jingye was speechless. Forget it, let's go and see Her Majesty. Tong Jingye withdrew his surging imposing manner. Seeing this, Qing Lian heaved a sigh of relief, but immediately became nervous again. She didn't expect to see Qi Zixiao under such circumstances. She heard that Qi Zixiao was a rather unreasonable person, and she didn't know how she would be treated. Of the 36 stratagems, the safest would be to escape. Although there were many experts around, he could still escape if he wanted to. Sheath your sword and follow me to the palace to see Her Majesty. Xianja walked to Qing Lian and said coldly. All right. Qing Lian clenched her teeth and sheathed her sword. After thinking about it, she still felt that the things that Renbaqian talked about were rare, and couldn't just leave like that. As long as Renbaqian was there, she would be fine, right? Not to mention, Su Qing and Renbaqian were still cooperating. At this moment, she felt that Su Qing's cooperation with Renbaqian was the right choice, but she forgot that she wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Su Qing. A moment later, she, Tonglan, Tong Jingye, and the others were brought into a large hall. Wait, Her Majesty will see you in a while. Xianja disappeared after saying this. Tong Jingye touched his chin and asked, I don't seem to have anything to do today. Why am I here? Even Her Majesty can't stand seeing you get involved in the affairs of women, Tonglan said. Shirgan and the others grinned, and had to hold back their laughter. Tong Jingye's face immediately turned black as he glared at Tonglan. Your Majesty, they are waiting in Hanyuan Palace Hall. Xianju appeared in the Empress's bedroom and cupped her fists. Oh, let them wait a little longer. The Empress concentrated on playing Candy Crush and said, Wait for Renbaqian to come back first. Your Majesty, move this over. Hong Wuan whispered from behind the Empress. I know. The Empress quickly moved the mouse. After a while, Renbaqian arrived at the bedroom. Hong Wuan and Qing Yuan made way for him when they saw him approaching. Renbaqian sniffed the Empress's hair before saying, Your Majesty, you bathed in purple orchids today. It was yesterday. The Empress snorted. To me, Your Majesty is always in the present. Renbaqian whispered into her ear. Move further away. It tickles. The Empress shrank her neck and hit him on the head with the back of her hand, causing a bump to swell up. However, what you said just now was rather interesting. The Empress put down the mouse and muttered. Everyone is always in the present. Then, she seemed to have thought of something and fell into deep thought. Your Majesty? Renbaqian called out softly. Sir Run, don't disturb Her Majesty. She might be enlightened about something. Hong Wuan gently patted Renbaqian. Enlightened about what? Renbaqian was puzzled. Look at Her Majesty's fingers and eyes. Her Majesty often experiences this kind of situation where she suddenly becomes enlightened about something. If she succeeds, her strength will increase, so we can't disturb her, Hong Wuan said. Renbaqian walked to the front of the Empress and found her making a strange gesture with her fingers. Her eyes were narrowed into slits, and there seemed to be a red glow flowing through them. Renbaqian opened his mouth. Was this the legendary epiphany? Did the Empress often experience this kind of situation? Chapter 639. How long will it take for Her Majesty to wake up? Renbaqian circled around the Empress twice, and saw that her face was different from the past. She was not as spirited as she used to be, and her eyes were slightly squinted. Renbaqian always felt like reaching out to pinch her. The Empress didn't respond to the outside world at the moment, and this opportunity couldn't be missed. However, his desire to live overcame everything, and he gave up on the idea of being hung on a flagpole to dry in the wind. I don't know. Sometimes 2 to 4 hours, sometimes 8 to 10 hours, and at most 3 days, Hong Wuan said. They weren't afraid to tell Renbaqian about this. Will Her Majesty wake up if she encounters danger during this period? Renbaqian suddenly thought of something. Of course, the two of them said matter-of-factly. Oh. Renbaqian stood in front of the Empress and looked at her quietly. He still felt that it was fun to pinch her like this. Did Her Majesty summon Minister Tong and a few students to the palace? Renbaqian asked after admiring the Empress for a while. He knew about this before he came back, but he didn't expect the Empress to suddenly enter a state of enlightenment. Yes, but we have to wait for Her Majesty to wake up, Qing Yuan said. I'll go and take a look. Renbaqian got up and left the hall. After asking the palace guards, he found Xianjia and found out which hall those people were in. After asking, Renbaqian wasn't in a hurry to leave. He stood 5 meters away from Xianjia, stretched out 2 fingers and asked, "How many are these?" Xianjia looked at Renbaqian expressionlessly, turned around, and walked away. Don't worry, let's take a look at your condition first. Maybe your eyes have a solution, Renbaqian said. Upon hearing Renbaqian's words, Xianjia immediately stopped, turned around and asked, "What solution?" "We have to see what's the condition of your eyes. Is it congenital amblyopia, astigmatism, or glaucoma?" Renbaqian said. "Her Majesty told me before, but we need to know what's the condition of your eyes." Xianjia said expressionlessly, "I don't know either. Next time, I'll bring a vision test for you and see what's the condition of your eyes," Renbaqian said. "Thank you." Xianjia remained expressionless. She nodded at Renbaqian and left as if she didn't want to say another word. Even though Renbaqian rarely interacted with Xianjia, he could often see her since she was the commander of the imperial bodyguards. It was just that there were very few opportunities for them to talk. In all fairness, Xianjia's looks were above average. Furthermore, she wasn't as heroic as the Empress. If one only looked at her face, she looked more delicate. However, her expression was even colder than the Empress's. Renbaqian had heard from Qing Yuan that Xianjia wasn't originally this cold, but after she became the commander of the Empress's imperial bodyguards, she gradually became like this. Renbaqian guessed that, on one hand, it was because this would help him establish his prestige and command that bunch of burly imperial bodyguards. On the other hand, it was because he had learned from the Empress. After putting on a cold face for a long time, he naturally became like this. After all, the Empress was the idol of many people in Dayo. It was normal for a lady like Xianjia to imitate the Empress's expressions. Renbaqian arrived at Hanyuan Palace Hall, while pondering about Xianjia's eyes. He saw Tongjinya casually pacing back and forth in the hall. Tonglan, who was still covered in blood, was standing there with her eyes closed. Everyone else was obediently standing in one place and not moving an inch. "A principal run, where's Her Majesty?" Tongjinya heard footsteps and turned his head to see that only Renbaqian had entered. He stretched his neck to look behind him, and was puzzled when he realized that the Empress wasn't there. "Her Majesty seems to have comprehended something and won't be able to see you for the time being," Renbaqian replied. He took a closer look at Qing Lian and Tonglan. Indeed, it was as he had heard before. Tonglan was the one who suffered a loss. "Then, I'll just keep waiting here?" Tongjinya asked with his eyes wide open. "Sir Tong, you can go back first." Renbaqian thought for a while. Tongjinya's status couldn't be compared to others, and the Ministry of Works had other things to do. It wasn't appropriate to keep him waiting here. It would be fine if it was only for a short period of time, but no one knew when the Empress would wake up from her comprehension. If Tongjinya left first, the Empress probably wouldn't blame him. In that case, if Her Majesty asks about it, remember to help me say a word. Tongjinya grinned. "Sir Tong, you may leave," Renbaqian replied. Upon seeing this, Tongjinya didn't stay any longer. After taking a deep look at Qing Lian, he strode out of Hanyuan Palace Hall. The remaining people were the students of the academy. Qing Lian, Tonglan, Shirgan, and a young girl were this year's new students. Renbaqian remembered that her name was Zhu Hua. "Don't you guys have anything to do? Fighting after school? It seems like there's too little homework." Renbaqian sneered as he paced a few steps in front of them. "It has nothing to do with me. I was forced to accept the challenge. I can't possibly not retaliate when someone punches me in the face, right?" Qing Lian snorted. "She's from Great Xia." Tong Lan mumbled and glared at Qing Lian. Qing Lian swept a glance at her and said, I can listen in with the principal's permission. Furthermore, you lost just now. In the future, when you see me, you have to respectfully address me as sister. Call me sister first. Tong Lan opened her mouth and wanted to retort, but no matter what, it was a fact that she had lost. If he were to abide by the terms of the bet, he would have to address this damned great Xia person as sister every time he saw her in the future. That would be worse than killing her. But if she didn't abide by the bet, she wouldn't be able to get over it. A dirty move was a dirty move. She understood that if she was willing to bet, she had to be willing to lose. In any case, no matter which choice she made, it would be very uncomfortable. The more she thought about it, the more depressed she became. Finally, she screamed, tilted her head, and slammed it into Shurgan. Why did you bump into me? Shurgan said grumpily as he dodged to the side. My head is itchy. Tong Lan was going crazy. Looking at Tong Lan's expression, Renbaqian couldn't be bothered to reprimand her. It would be good to let her learn a lesson, so that she wouldn't have to use her fists to do the talking every day. What about you two? What happened? Renbaqian looked at Shurgan and Zhuhua again. Shurgan immediately complained. I didn't do anything. Wasn't Tong Lan injured? I was afraid that she would take the opportunity to attack, so I stopped her. Tong Lan went crazy when she heard that Shurgan had injured her. Don't you know that you shouldn't expose others' shortcomings? I even stood up for you. Don't be ungrateful. Shurgan rolled his eyes at her and said to Renbaqian, Teacher, you said that students should help each other. I didn't do anything wrong, did I? Don't play petty tricks. Renbaqian glared at him. When he arrived, he heard what happened from the others, and it was obvious that Shurgan wasn't telling the truth. What about you? He looked at Zhuhua again. Zhuhua glanced at both sides and looked away. You got into a fight after just a few days in school? You are also a talent. I didn't fight. Zhuhua immediately said. You didn't fight, but you used a knife, right? Renbaqian sneered. This group of students was really talented. They brought knives, daggers, and swords to school. He wondered if they would bring mace in the future. I only took out a knife and didn't fight, Zhuhua argued. According to the law, fighting in private in Lan City without reporting to the Public Order Bureau will be punished with 3 lashes. Furthermore, this matter was brought to the attention of Her Majesty. Your crime will be increased by 10 times, and each of you will be punished with 30 lashes. Now that Her Majesty is busy and can't take care of you, I will give you a chance to copy the 3-character classic 100 times each. You can go home when you finish. Starting tomorrow, you will have to clean the toilets for a week, Renbaqian said. When they heard this, their faces immediately turned bitter. Whether it was copying the 3-character classic 100 times or cleaning the toilets, it was like torture to them, and it wasn't much better than being whipped. Furthermore, it had always been 1 more crime. How could there be 10 more crimes? I don't accept this. Qing Lian's eyes widened. She, a great expert, actually had to copy books and clean toilets in Lan City? This couldn't be tolerated. If you want to listen in, you have to abide by the rules here, Renbaqian said coldly. This matter has already been brought to the attention of Her Majesty. Do you think you can escape? Teacher, I'm hungry. Shurgan licked his face. Since you are so energetic, it's fine to starve for a few meals. Renbaqian left everyone in the hall and went out to get someone to bring him pen and paper. Chapter 640. Oh, you wrote quite fast. Renbaqian took the stack of papers from Shurgan. Shurgan knew very well that he was living under another person's roof, so he immediately replied, It's all thanks to teacher's good guidance. If your father wasn't the great elder, I would have suspected that you were wearing the skin of the aboriginals. Renbaqian sighed. Shurqing and Shurgan were different from the aboriginals. Go back. The next time you are caught, it won't be so simple. You will have to go to Jingyang Street and shout, I'm really my father for the whole afternoon. Shurgan's face turned black when he heard this. Yague's mouth was too harsh. Needless to say, he would have to shout for the whole afternoon. Just one sentence would make him lose face. Renbaqian moved a chair to sit in front of Hanyuan Hall, crossed his legs, and waved his hand to chase Shurgan away. He turned to look at the room and reckoned that Tonglan was almost done. Shurgan's group of students had been punished more than once and had learned from it. As for the other two, they were scratching their ears and cheeks like two female monkeys. They probably wouldn't be able to leave Hanyuan Hall tonight. After a while, Tonglan put down her pen, snorted, and glanced at Qing Lian. Realizing that Qing Lian was ignoring her, Tonglan resentfully got up and walked to Zhu Hua's side. "Hey, what's your name?" "Zhu Hua." Zhu Hua, who was scratching her hair, looked up with sorrow in her eyes. If she had known earlier, she would have joined the army. "When you get out, I will invite you to my house," Tonglan said. "If you can help me write this, I don't mind not going to your house," Zhu Hua immediately muttered. When Tonglan heard this, she immediately shook her head like a rattle drum and floated out of Hanyuan Palace Hall. "If you are caught again, in addition to copying, you will have to go to Jingyang Street and shout, 'My father is really my grandfather,' for the whole afternoon," Renbaqian said maliciously. At the same time, he took the punishment paper from Tonglan's hands and scanned it. "My grandfather will fight you to the death," Tonglan said impolitely. "Her Majesty will fight your grandfather to the death," Renbaqian sneered. "My background is much stronger than yours." Tonglan was immediately speechless. Her little face immediately darkened, and the joy she felt from writing the punishment disappeared without a trace. "By the way, do you really know what a brothel does?" Renbaqian asked. "Isn't it just eating, drinking, and playing?" Tonglan said disdainfully. "My mother said that all the women inside are bad. If my father goes there again, she will break his legs. If your father finds out that you sold him out just like that, he will break your legs," Renbaqian said before waving his hand to chase Tonglan home. Once Tonglan left the palace, she looked up and shouted 3 times, "Ah! Ah! Ah!" Then he heard his stomach rumble like thunder, and ran home without looking back. After Tonglan left, Renbaqian walked around the hall to check on their progress. Qing Lian wrote the least. She only wrote 5 pages, but one of them was written in the language of this world according to the dictionary he gave her. She was a smart person. Although he had suffered a little, he had learned a lot of words this time. He looked at Zhu Hua again, and saw that her handwriting was similar to Qing Lian's. Her handwriting was crooked like a chicken claw. Renbaqian shook his head and sighed. "You are a pretty girl, but why are your handwriting so ugly?" Zhu Hua threw her pen on the table and lamented. "I have never learned how to write before. Why don't you give me 30 lashes instead?" "You have to practice because you haven't learned. In the future, you won't even be able to read the newspaper. What else can you do?" Renbaqian said. "I'm going crazy." Zhu Hua hugged her head and pulled her hair. "Keep it up. You are the worst," Renbaqian encouraged her. "Principal, are you encouraging me?" Zhu Hua looked up at Renbaqian with her eyes wide open. "Of course, but encouragement should also be based on objective reality," Renbaqian laughed. "Keep it up. I hope to see you at the academy tomorrow. Can you let me go to the toilet?" Zhu Hua turned around and asked pitifully. Go. The guards outside will take you there." Renbaqian waved his hand. After Zhu Hua left, Qing Lian looked up and said, "The aboriginals are so xenophobic. I really don't know how you survive here." Renbaqian touched his chin and asked, "I'm all right." "Emph." Qing Lian snorted. She sighed for nothing. Of course, no one would do anything to this gigolo. Who is this Mencius's mother? Who is Do Yenshan? Who wrote the Analects of Confucius? Where is the book written by Mencius? Also, Xia has Yu, Shang has Tang. Zhou Wenwu is known as the 3 Kings. What does that mean? Qing Lian opened her mouth and asked a lot of questions. If you want to know, follow the new students to class in the future. I can't explain it clearly here, Renbaqian said. He then waved his hand and left Hanyuan Palace Hall for the Empress's bedroom. On the other hand, the bedroom was brightly lit. The fan was turned on and there was an ice basin. However, The Empress was still sitting on the bed in the same position as before and hadn't woken up. Renbaqian sat beside the Empress and looked at her, who was exceptionally quiet under the light. He sat there for 2 hours before returning to Pingle Park to rest. Renbaqian originally thought that the Empress would wake up soon, but she didn't wake up for 3 days in a row. Every time Renbaqian went to the bedroom, he would see the Empress in the same position without moving or speaking. Although he initially felt that this kind of Empress was quite interesting, after a long time, it was as if he was guarding a puppet and something was missing. Even when the Empress was angry, she was still cuter than this. Although the Empress took longer to comprehend than before, no one was worried. After all, with her strength, it wouldn't be a problem for her to not eat or drink for a few days. Most importantly, her breathing was very stable, and the red glow in her squinted eyes never weakened. It just made Renbaqian miss the lively Empress a little. On the 5th day, Renbaqian woke up in the morning and went to the Empress's bedroom to see if she had woken up. From afar, he saw Qing Yuan running out. "What's wrong? Is Her Majesty awake?" Renbaqian stopped Qing Yuan and asked. "She just woke up. I'll go and prepare some food for Her Majesty." Qing Yuan bowed to Renbaqian and hurriedly ran away. Renbaqian was relieved to hear that the Empress had woken up. She had finally woken up. He hurried to the bedroom and saw the Empress sitting there in a daze. If it wasn't for her extremely bright eyes, he would have thought that she was still comprehending. "Your Majesty, how do you feel?" Renbaqian walked over and asked softly. "You are here." The Empress turned to look at Renbaqian, smiled, and said, "I have gained something this time. I'm about to break through again." The word "again" is well said. Renbaqian sighed. Super VIPs were indeed different from ordinary players. Then he suddenly thought of a very important question and said, "Your Majesty, if you break through again, I reckon that you won't be able to give birth to a son in a short period of time." "Nonsense." The Empress immediately spat at him and blushed. Then she softened her voice and said, "There's still some time left." In fact, if it weren't for Renbaqian, the Empress would have broken through this time. But how could she say this? During breakfast, the Empress demonstrated to Renbaqian what it meant to have a godlike appetite. He didn't know if it was due to the great advancement in her cultivation, but the Empress needed a large amount of energy to transform her blood essence. She ate a 4-corn cow and 2 jumping goats for breakfast and barely felt 70% full. Chapter 641. Class dismissed. Just as Renbaqian uttered these 2 words, all the students in the room ran toward the backyard at lightning speed. However, a small figure was the fastest. In a few flashes, she landed in front of the toilet in the backyard. Then, she put her hands behind her back and stared fixedly at the students who were rushing over. "You are not allowed to use the toilet." Tonglan looked at everyone. "Why?" Everyone widened their eyes and looked at Tonglan with dissatisfaction. "You are not allowed to use it means you are not allowed to use it. Why are there so many whys?" Tonglan's eyes glowed fiercely. She looked like she would teach anyone who dared to use the toilet a lesson. "What should we do then? We can't possibly pee in our pants, right? There will be a pungent smell during class. Even if you can stand it, we can't." Dulalu snorted. "In 3 days, you can use it however you want. The black bamboo forest is so big. Isn't it enough for you?" Tonglan swept her fierce gaze across everyone's faces, causing them to stare back at her. Seeing this, everyone thought about it and didn't want to be beaten up by Tonglan over this matter. They ran to the corner of the wall, jumped over it, and headed straight for the black bamboo forest. However, the girls were a little helpless. The black bamboo forest wasn't small. If they ran too far away, they might not be able to return in time for class. If they were too close, there would be guys everywhere. "You can just use the toilet," Tonglan said. She always gave the girls some preferential treatment. She let the girls go to the toilet. She calculated in her mind that the men's toilet didn't need to be cleaned. In that case, the women's toilet would be cleaned by Shirgan, Shuahua, and that great Xia woman. The 3 of them wouldn't be able to say anything, right? She hated herself for thinking of such a good idea so late. She had been cleaning for a few days for nothing. When the freshman came to the toilet, Tong Lan repeated her plan. Little girl, why should we listen to you? A few guys laughed. Without saying a word, Tong Lan suddenly disappeared from where she was standing and appeared in front of the boys. She kicked each of them and sent 4 of them flying. However, when the last guy was about to attack, he was forced back by a punch. Tong Lan looked up and saw a 15 or 16-year-old guy. He looked ordinary, but his reaction was fast and his strength wasn't weak. Little girl, be reasonable, that guy said angrily. I'll only reason with you after you beat me. After saying this, Tong Lan disappeared once again. When she reappeared, she was above the boy's head and stomped down on his head. When the surrounding people heard what Tong Lan said, they were a little stunned. How could this be? You're being unreasonable if you can win, but you're only trying to be reasonable when you can't win. Tong Lan exchanged a few moves with that guy, and had a whole new level of respect for him. She didn't expect there to be such an expert in this batch of freshmen. All the more reason to defeat him. At the thought of this, Tong Lan's speed increased by a few notches, and her strength increased. She threw punch after punch, and every time her fists collided with her opponents, there would be a loud explosion. Following the loud bangs, the young man kept retreating. His hands started to tremble and his face turned red. However, he didn't make a sound and just gritted his teeth. However, it seemed like he couldn't hold on much longer. Tong Lan made a half-turn in the air, and punched the other party's chest again. The young man couldn't block it anymore, and flew out like a cannonball. Oomph! Tong Lan immediately stopped, and her small face was full of ferocity. Who else isn't convinced? Before she finished her sentence, a figure rushed over from afar. After flipping a few rounds in the air, her leg ruthlessly chopped down like a giant axe. Tong Lan met it with a punch, and the person flew out with a bang. Like a nail, Tong Lan was also smashed more than a foot into the ground. Zhuohua. Tong Lan was furious when she saw the girl who was wearing an animal skin short skirt and a tube top. She didn't allow them to use the men's toilet, so the other 3 could clean up the toilet. She had done such a good deed, but Zhuohua actually hit her? Why did you hit my younger brother? Zhuohua was also furious. Your younger brother? Tong Lan was stunned. She looked at the young man who had just run back, and was sent flying by her. She couldn't see any resemblance between him and Zhuohua, be it the shape of his face or his eyes. No matter how she looked at him, there wasn't any resemblance. My third uncle's younger brother, Zhuohua said angrily. I didn't know. Tong Lan mumbled softly. Then, she raised her head and said, I'm helping you guys relieve the pressure of cleaning the toilet. It's your brother's fault. What exactly is going on? Zhuohua looked at Tong Lan and the youth before asking. The young man snorted as he recounted what had just happened. You are too overbearing. Zhuohua glared at Tong Lan. You don't know how to appreciate my kindness. In any case, we can't use the men's toilet. Tong Lan gritted her teeth. No need, no need, Zhuohua said coldly. She turned to her brother and said, There's a huge purple bamboo forest behind us. You guys aren't afraid of being seen. Go there. A moment later, many freshmen appeared in the purple bamboo forest. No matter how they thought about it, they felt that something was amiss. Why did they have to go to the bathroom in the forest? Was there something wrong with it? Run Baqian sat in his office, looked at the people in front of him, and said, Aha, it wasn't easy for me to make these students develop the habit of going to the toilet. Just because you don't clean up as much, you broke this rule? And it's only been a few days and you're already fighting in school? Tong Lan was hesitant. At this moment, should she lower her head and show her remorse or raise her head and show her pride? She was Tong Lan, a genius. Of course, he couldn't lower his head like those idiots. Thinking of this, she raised her face proudly. This is Zhuo Wei's first offense. Copy the 3-character classic 100 times and clean the toilet for a week starting from next week. As for the 2 of you, it hasn't even been a week, and you're committing the same offense again. Copy the 3-character classic 200 times and extend your toilet cleaning time by half a month. When Zhuohua and Tong Lan heard this, their faces turned green. The fear of the three-character classic surged into their minds again. Ever since he finished copying the last time, he had been dreaming about the three-character classic for the past few days. He actually had to copy it again, and this time, he had to copy even more. "Principal, please whip me instead," Zhuohua said with a bitter expression. 60 lashes? Ren Baqian asked. Zhuohua nodded with a bitter face. She would rather be whipped than copy the three-character classic. The whips of the Public Order Bureau are woven from the skin of the tail of a spiked dragon. There are barbs on it, and a layer of skin will fall off after being whipped. If you suffer 60 lashes, I reckon that you will be disfigured, Ren Baqian said faintly. Are there any other punishments? Don't make me copy the three-character classic. Zhuohua was on the verge of tears. Otherwise, how can I teach you a lesson? All of your brains are muscles, and your actions are faster than your brains. Go back and copy it, but you can copy it at home this time. Hand it over to me in 2 days. That's not right, Tong Lan suddenly said. What do you want to say? Ren Baqian looked over. Fighting in Lan City is only 3 lashes. Last time, you said that the punishment would be increased by 10 times in front of Her Majesty. This time, the punishment is obviously not in front of Her Majesty, so why is the punishment so heavy? Tong Lan looked up unconvinced. Ren Baqian sneered. I'm the principal, so what I say goes. The punishment for fighting in the school will be increased by 20 times. Tong Lan's face turned red with anger. She stared at Ren Baqian fiercely as if she wanted to pounce on him and bite him. After holding it in for a long time, she said, You are abusing your power. Yes, you are not clear about the rewards and punishments, and you are abusing your power. Well, that's right. And then? Ren Baqian crossed his arms and looked at Tong Lan with an amused expression. The Zhuohua siblings were stunned. You admit it? You actually admitted it so casually? I won't give in. Aw. Tong Lan mumbled. I for a long time but couldn't think of anything to do with Ren Baqian. Her face turned from red to black, and she ran out screaming. Do the two of you have anything else to say? If not, go back to class. Ren Baqian looked at the siblings again. Let's go back to class, both of them said. Chapter 642. After the Empress woke up from her enlightenment, she pondered for another 2 days, or rather, settled down for 2 days before returning to normal. Follow me out of the palace. As soon as Ren Baqian returned to the palace, he heard the Empress say this. We won't be having lunch in the palace either. Is your Majesty in a good mood today? Ren Baqian laughed. I'm fine. It's just that I'm a little bored. The Water Empress said lightly. Your Majesty should go out and walk more. Reading 10,000 books is not as good as walking 10,000 miles. In ancient times, the Emperor of China was restricted from leaving the palace and had to make arrangements 2 months in advance. And when he left the palace in private, he had to worry about assassinations and danger. However, this wasn't a problem for the Empress. There were no restrictions on the Empress leaving the palace, and she was one of the top experts in the world. However, the Empress preferred to stay in the palace most of the time. In modern terms, she was purely a homebody. It was rare for her to suggest leaving the palace for a stroll, and Ren Baqian was naturally happy to accompany her. Ren Baqian returned to Pingle Park and changed into an ordinary set of clothes. When he arrived at the Empress's quarters, he realized that she was still wearing the red muslin dress that she had previously worn. Your Majesty, it's too easy to recognize you like this. You don't want to be recognized everywhere, right? Ren Baqian asked. Why? There aren't many people who can recognize me, the Empress retorted. Not to mention your Majesty's appearance. Just your Majesty's aura alone is not something that ordinary people can compare to. Even those who have not seen your Majesty before can sense it. Moreover, there are many people in the city who have seen your Majesty before. As long as they see you once, they will definitely not forget you. In addition, I'm by your side. I'm afraid that many people will think that the two of them are walking together. Ren Baqian laughed. The Empress frowned and thought about it. Sure enough, it was easy to be recognized with Renbachian by her side. She looked at him and said, "That's your fault." Renbachian shrugged. "I don't want to change my clothes." The Empress was a little worried. In Renbachian's eyes, the frown on her face because she didn't want to change her clothes was a little cute. "Your Majesty." Renbachian thought for a while, and remembered that there was an ancient question and answer that was very suitable for this situation. The ancient said, "When naked, should you cover your upper body or lower body?" Answer, "My face is blocked. I'll cover my face then." Renbachian spread his hands again. The Empress originally thought that he would have some good suggestions, but she didn't expect him to actually give such a constructive suggestion. "I'm serious," the Empress repeated earnestly. "I'm serious as well." Renbachian asked, "Is there any other way?" The Empress thought about it seriously. It seemed that there was really no better way. A moment later, the Empress appeared in a red muslin dress with a white undergarment underneath. Her face was covered with a red scarf. On the other hand, Renbachian was wearing a green robe with a black cloth covering his face. The two of them swaggered out of the palace. The guards behind them looked like they wanted to laugh, but at the same time, they didn't want to. "I feel that this is very silly," the Empress couldn't help but say. "I'm really out of my mind today. I actually believed your nonsense. When I get back, I'll order 2 sets of clothes. One set will have female written on the chest and big written on the back. The other set will have male written on the chest and thief written on the back." Pfft, the Empress spat. The two of them strolled through Beihong district, attracting countless gazes. After all, with their attire, it was hard not to attract attention. "I remember eating here when I was young, and the taste was pretty good," the Empress said as she looked up at the signboard when they walked past a restaurant. "Do you want to go up and try it? I haven't had lunch yet." Renbachian stopped and looked up, only to see the words Shanhui Restaurant. If he remembered correctly, this restaurant seemed to be a place that the children of the officials liked to hang out. He wondered if the Empress would put on a thrilling show when she went up there. The Empress really had this idea. She immediately nodded after hearing Renbachian's words and said, "All right." Seeing the Empress nod, Renbachian immediately became excited. He was waiting to see who would be unlucky. He pulled the Empress into the restaurant and headed for the 2nd floor. Customer. A burly waiter with a face that looked more like a bandit than a waiter immediately tried to stop the two of them. "Are we not allowed to go up to the 2nd floor?" Renbachian asked, wondering why the show was about to start so soon. "Of course not. It's just that there are too many people on the 2nd floor, and it's a little noisy. It's fine if the two of you want to go up." The fierce-looking waiter waved his hand and sounded simple and honest. Those who could wear gauze in Lan City weren't ordinary people. Those who could work as waiters here were definitely not fools. How could they not be tactful? "It's fine. We like it when there are more people. The livelier it is," Renbachian said. Renbachian pulled the Empress all the way up to the 2nd floor, and saw that there were indeed many people there. Renbachian could even recognize a few of them. Hong Wu's granddaughter, Hong Xian, Lu Ruoyao, and Du Changkong's 2 cousins were actually there. Renbachian even saw 2 students from his school. One was Du Laolu, and the other was Su Peng. They were both children of the officials, but their talents were worlds apart when compared to others. Renbachian and the Empress attracted some attention when they came up. They were puzzled. Weren't the two of them hot to cover their faces on such a hot day? However, when they sensed that the two of them were manual experts, they immediately turned their attention elsewhere and ignored them. Renbachian pulled the Empress to a corner and sat down. He found that the people at Du Laoyu's table seemed to be arguing about something. "Du Laolu, you have been in that school for a year. What have you learned? Teach me? Maybe I can even call you Mr. Du. I heard that's how the people in Great Xia address scholars." A young man laughed. "Humph." Du Laolu snorted and couldn't be bothered with him. On the contrary, Su Peng was somewhat dissatisfied and asked, "To you, what's the meaning of this? Are you here to look for trouble?" "How can that be? I'm envious. After all, there are so many people here, but only a few of you were selected to study at the school. It's obvious that you are different from us. You are scholars, and I want to study too. The young man called Tuyu, who was about 16 or 17 years old, said in a weird tone. His words caused a lot of laughter. Everyone knew that those who were selected to study at the school were useless. Stop talking nonsense in a weird tone. Su Peng slammed the table angrily. Why are you so impatient? I was just saying it casually. However, don't tell me that you didn't learn anything after staying there for a year. Otherwise, you can enlighten us. You want to learn? Go to the school and listen, but with your brain you can't even add or subtract single-digit numbers. I'm afraid that you won't understand even if you go. Du Laolu couldn't help but sneer. That's why I asked you to tell us, right? Tuyu didn't take it seriously and smiled at the others instead. What's there to talk about with you? Do you know chemistry? Do you know physics? Do you know what a lever is? Do you know what an internal combustion engine is? Look, you don't even know what I'm talking about. What's the point of me telling you? Have you heard of playing the lute to a cow? Du Laolu sneered. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.